Dear listeners, Evelyn is thrilled to welcome you back to our familiar time slot. Today, through a remarkable short story titled, Holding My 4-Year-Old Son, Waiting for an Uber in the Pouring Rain. Who knew I'd get into the luxury car of my ex-boyfriend from 5 years ago, panicking and covering my child's face with a coat, only for him to take one look and ask, "Where's the boy's father?" If any character leaves a strong impression on you, please share your thoughts in the comments below the video. And don't forget to give Untold Stories a like and subscribe to the channel to continue listening to deeply emotional, real-life stories every day. That night, the rain poured down as if someone had torn the sky apart. To me, I stood under the awning in front of the gates of St. Thomas's Hospital in London, one arm tightly holding my 4-year-old son who was sleeping heavily from exhaustion, the other hand desperately tapping the ride-hailing app that had been buffering for nearly 10 minutes without a driver in sight. The wind whipped the rain into my face, soaking a patch on the shoulder of my thin raincoat, while my phone flashed a red battery warning, acting as if just one more call would kill it completely. When the black car pulled up close to the curb, its headlights cutting through the curtain of rain into two blinding white streaks, I only managed to catch a glimpse of the license plate ending in 86, similar to the one on the app, before hurriedly pulling the back door open and climbing in. As soon as the door closed, the noisy world outside was instantly severed, replaced by the smell of new leather seats, a cold, expensive cologne, and a kind of costly silence that made someone accustomed to riding in cheap Ubers like me realize something was immediately wrong. But at that moment, Miles whimpered softly in my arms, his forehead burning with fever. I tried to speak. In a normal voice, "Excuse me, mate, could you take us to the Millwall estate? Down Commercial Road, please?" The car didn't budge. The man in the driver's seat didn't answer right away. There was only the rhythmic, sweeping sound of the windshield wipers, moving so slowly it sent a chill down my spine. I looked up into the rearview mirror and my entire body froze as if someone had poured a bucket of ice water over my crew place. Head. The man in the mirror had very familiar eyes, a straight nose, a sharp jawline, wearing a crisp white shirt under a dark suit jacket, his hands resting on the Greta's steering wheel were still so clean and beautifully shaped that I once joked, back in the day, that as long as he kept his mouth shut, people would actually believe he was a posh gentleman. 5 years without seeing each other, and Harry Davenport was still Harry Davenport, the only difference being that the arrogance of his early 20s had been polished into a cold, unpredictable calmness that made it hard to guess what he was thinking. As for me, Hannah Andrews, a 28-year-old freelance journalist for an online newspaper in London, a single mother to a 4-year-old boy named Miles, I had told myself 100 times that it would be best for them never to cross paths in this lifetime. Yet, on a rainy night, while carrying my son from the hospital back to the old council estate where we rented a flat barely 400 square feet, I had personally opened the door to that very man's car. Harry looked at me through the mirror, his voice a pitch deeper than my memory. "Long time no see, Hannah." A very light greeting, but it made my arms tighten around Miles so much that he shifted uncomfortably. Almost by reflex, I pulled the flap of my raincoat over half of the boy's face, leaving only his forehead with the cooling gel patch and his soft, damp hair exposed. Miles didn't just casually resemble Harry, leaving room for strangers to make wild guesses. He looked so much like him that every time I watched my son sleep on his side, I felt as though a miniature version of the man from years ago was lying in my house. I forced a smile, feeling like the corners of my mouth looked uglier than if I were crying. "I'm sorry, I got in the wrong car. The one I booked is probably behind us. I'll get out now." Just as my hand touched the door handle, the car's central locking clicked with a dry, sharp sound. The door wouldn't open. In that split second, my heart pounded wildly like a bird trapped in a cage. Harry remained seated, his voice monotone. "It's pouring out there. Why drag a child out? Where are you going?" "I'll take you." "No need, it's too much trouble for you. My driver will be here soon." The harder I tried to stay calm, the more my voice betrayed a hoarse tremor from the cold and exhaustion. I had no choice but to look down and adjust Miles's coat to avoid that gaze in the mirror. 5 years ago, Harry used to tell me I was a terrible liar. Whenever I was nervous, my fingers would unconsciously touch the bridge of my nose and then rub the back of my neck. So, the moment I realized my hand was moving toward my nose, I immediately pulled it back, pretending to rub my son's back instead. Harry glanced down at the glowing phone screen on my lap. The app still displayed the text. Driver is contacting you. He didn't expose the lie. Immediately, simply saying mildly, do Ubers use hand-stitched leather seats nowadays? I choked for a beat, but my mouth moved faster than my brain. I booked the wrong tier, it's an executive. Since my husband also drives this kind of car, it looked familiar to me. The moment the word husband left my lips, my throat felt as if it had been scratched by thorns. The rain outside suddenly grew heavier, drumming loudly against the glass, masking the suffocating silence between us. Harry didn't turn, his head merely looking at me through the mirror, his eyes growing deeper and darker. Your husband also drives a black car with a license plate ending in 86? Yeah, I replied blindly, instantly realizing how stupid I was. Lying to someone who knew me too well was like trying to catch rainwater with a wicker basket. The harder you try, the more it leaks. The corners of Harry's mouth twitched slightly. It was unclear whether he was smiling or angry. So, do you usually call your husband mate too? My face grew hot. Thankfully, it was dark inside the car. I hugged Miles. Tighter, my voice hardening. It's an inside joke between my husband and me. You don't need to understand. A phone ringtone blared at that exact moment, cutting through the fake composure I was trying to build. The screen showed the real driver's number. Before I could decline, my finger slipped. The call was answered, and the man's loud voice boomed through the speakerphone. Hi, love, I'm so sorry. My engine just died in the middle of the road. Could you cancel the trip for me? The rain is too heavy, I can't make it to you. The interior of the car was so silent I could hear my own breathing. If there were a hole under my feet, I would gladly grab my son and dive into it. But, unfortunately, beneath my feet were only spotless floor mats, so clean that placing my mud-caked boots on them felt like a sin. Harry waited for me to hang up before slowly asking, Did your husband's engine? D? I closed my eyes for a second, reminding myself, a woman who gave birth alone, rushed her child to A&E alone in the middle of the night, and begged for salary. Advances to pay rent could not possibly die from a sarcastic remark by an Entei ex-boyfriend. So I took a deep breath and rattled off the address quickly. Millwall Estate, Block B. If it's on your way, please give us a lift. Thank you. The car began to roll. The rain slashed against the windows. The city after 8 p.m. blurred into the red and yellow lights of traffic jams. Miles slept fitfully, occasionally burying his face into my chest, his little hands clutching my collar. I tried to turn my body so Harry couldn't get a clear view of him, but doing so only made me look like I was hiding stolen goods. 5 years ago, I left Harry with a very cruel sentence in a karaoke room on my birthday in Soho. I told him that loving him was nothing special. I had my fun, and now I was done. I remember that sentence to this day, not out of pride, but because every time I recall it, my throat tastes as bitter as swallowing medicine. At that time, I was pregnant, thinking I had been betrayed, hurting so much I just wanted to smash everything so the other person would hurt too. After that, I vanished from his life. I changed my number, moved, gave birth to Miles in a small hospital, and left the father's name blank on the birth certificate. I used to think that if I just held out long enough, the past would rot away like an old jumper forgotten at the bottom of a wardrobe. But tonight, the past was sitting in the driver's seat, barely an arm's length away. Harry suddenly asked, Your son? Yes, my son. I tried to emphasize the word my, as if saying it firmly enough would make the truth sit obediently in my mouth. How old is he? 3. The answer slipped out very fast, so fast that even I felt guilty. Miles was 4 years and 2 months old, but if I told the truth, Harry would only need to do a little backward math, and everything would be impossible to heed. Harry didn't say anything immediately. The car stopped at a red light, the glow reflecting off half his face, making his naturally sharp features look even colder. A moment later, he said, Hannah, you're still exactly the same. I looked out the window, pretending not to understand. Same as what? Whenever you lie, your hand finds your nose first, and then you touch the back of your neck. I used to think that habit was cute. Looking back now, it's slightly annoying. His voice was calm, but every word fell like needle pricks, accurate and painful. I immediately dropped the hand that was about to rub my neck back onto my lap, hating myself for being seen through so easily. The atmosphere in the car grew heavier. I wanted to ask why he was in London, why he stopped right in front of the hospital, why after 5 years he could still casually call my name as if we had just argued yesterday. But those questions were too dangerous. Opening one would invite a flood of others, and I didn't have the strength to clean up the mess. The car turned into the narrow street leading to the Millwall estate. It was an NT7 in Bowser is a Prabhat. Old housing block built over a decade ago. The exterior paint was peeling. The communal courtyard always smelled of rainwater, damp rubbish, and cooking odors from the ground floor flats. Every time I reached the gates, I usually felt relieved because, despite being cramped, it was the only place my son and I could close the door and breathe in peace. But today, seeing Harry's car pull up outside the estate gates, I suddenly felt as if the place I lived was laid bare before my ex, so poor and real that nothing could be concealed. I hurriedly said, "Here is fine, thank you." Harry turned off the engine but didn't unlock the doors immediately. Through the resin seine mainend mirror, his gaze fell on Miles once again. Right at that moment, the boy shifted. The edge of the coat slipped down a bit, revealing long eyelashes and a small nose that looked exactly like the man observing him. I quickly pulled the Previns coat up, pretending to be afraid the boy would catch a chill, but it was clear that both Harry and I knew that gesture wasn't just about shielding him from the plainer wind. "Where's the boy's father?" Harry asked. This time his voice dropped, devoid of any sarcasm. A very normal question, but it made my chest ache as if someone had pressed hard on it. I looked at Miles, at his little hand tightly gripping my bag strap, and replied with all the remaining composure I had. "He's working away. He's busy. Busy enough to let his wife hold a feverish child waiting for a cab in the rain." That sentence bothered me. Not because he was wrong, but because for a fleeting moment, I wanted to snap back that the person who was so busy he left me to go through an entire pregnancy alone, enter the delivery room alone, and sign the plast birth certificate alone was him. But the words that rose to my throat were swallowed back down. What good would saying it do? 5 years had passed, and Miles had grown this much. My voice turned icy. "My family's business is none of yours." Harry looked at me for a very long time, so long I thought he would keep questioning me, but finally, he unlocked the doors. The soft click of the lock sounded so light, yet I felt as if I had just survived an interrogation. I carried Miles out of the car. The rain had lightened, but the wind was still biting. Before I closed the door, Harry handed me a black business card with simple silver lettering, unassuming, unlike the man he used to be. "If you need anything, call me," he said. I looked at the card, then at the man in the car. 5 years ago, I needed him. Most right when his phone was in the hands of another woman. Now, a business card arriving 5 years late felt simultaneously kind and ridiculous. Even so, in front of him, I took it. Not taking it would look like I was still afraid, and I didn't want Harry to see me fear him. I gave a perfunctory nod quickly, carried Miles into the lobby, and left the black car behind, along with the sound of rain drumming on the awning. The old lift climbed floor by floor sluggishly, the iron doors rattling softly. Miles woke up for a moment, rubbing his face into my neck, his voice hoarse from the fever. "Mummy, who was that man?" I bent down to kiss his forehead. Thankfully, his temperature was lower than before. "Just an old acquaintance, darling." He looked at me for a very long time. My heart clenched. Children sometimes don't understand adult matters, but they can sense the things adults try to heed. I rubbed his back and whispered, "Because he saw that you were being such a good boy." Miles stayed quiet for a moment, likely still sleepy, then mumbled, "I don't like coats covering my face. It's stuffy." Just a child's innocent remark, but it made me choke up. The lift doors opened. On the 7th floor, the long corridor smelled of damp mold, and the motion sensor light flickered a few times before fully turning on. I carried him to the flat at the end of the hall, laid him on the bed, changed his clothes, wiped him down, and prepared his fever medicine. Every movement was so familiar, I barely needed to think. Over the past 5 years, these repetitive routines were what kept me alive. When you are too busy earning money, raising a child, paying rent, and buying medicine, old pain has to learn to wait in line. Only when Miles was sleeping peacefully did I collapse onto the plastic chair. Next to the bed, my hand unconsciously reached into my pocket. Harry's business card was still there, slightly bent because I had gripped it too tightly. Harry Davenport, CEO, Apex Holdings. Those words sat still on the cold, neat black paper, just as his 5 years had. Surely traveled far from the tiny rented room where I once sat crying, holding my stomach. I took the card to the kitchen, intending to throw it straight into the bin under the sink. But just as the lid popped open, my eyes caught the back of the card. There was a handwritten line, the firm handwriting I used to memorize, on scrap paper back in university. If you need anything, call me. Don't bear it all alone. The small kitchen suddenly felt strangely quiet. Outside the balcony, rainwater dripped onto a dying pot of rosemary that Miles insisted I shouldn't throw away. I stood there for a long time, eventually not throwing the card away, just slipping it into my work notebook on the table. Not because I still hope for anything, I told myself, just in case I need another contact for a corporate interview. But that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harry's gaze through the rearview mirror, saw my own hand pulling the coat over Miles's face, and heard his question looping in my head. Where is his dad? His dad was right in front of him. It's just that neither of them knew it yet. Near dawn, Miles's fever spiked again. He tossed and turned, his lips dry, his breathing heavy. I bolted up and touched his forehead. The burning heat under my plebes androbiasonis. Palm instantly swept away all tangled thoughts. Harry's business card, the reunion, his questions, everything had to take a back seat because right now I had only one priority: getting Miles back to the hospital. As dawn broke, I carried Miles down to the estate courtyard to call a cab. Last night's rain had left muddy, mottled puddles. My trainers squelched through them. Miles lay in my arms, as limp as a wet towel. Normally, the boy was so mischievous that the downstairs neighbor knew it was him racing cars just from the sound of his footsteps. Yet this morning, he only opened his eyes to look at me briefly before squeezing them shut, muttering that he was thirsty. St. Thomas's Hospital was as crowded as a market during flu season. The pediatric ward was packed. Parents holding sick kids, people queuing for tickets, holding bags, juggling crying toddlers while calling work to take the day off. I carried Miles through the corridor, a tote bag slung over my shoulder stuffed with water, bottles, a jacket, his health records, and a few packs of biscuits in case I got hungry. An outsider looking in would probably just see a disheveled young mother with messy hair and a pale face, but I knew that inside I was even more of a mess. Meeting Harry last night was enough to throw my heart out of rhythm. This morning, Miles's fever was a reminder that real life never gives you time to sit still and be sad. After nearly 2 hours of waiting, the doctor diagnosed Miles with seasonal flu, requiring IV fluids and observation. I had just breathed a sigh of relief that it wasn't pneumonia when the phone in my pocket began buzzing relentlessly. The screen showed Liam, my editor-in-chief, a man with the ability to call more persistently than a debt collector. As soon as I answered, his voice blasted through. Hannah, where are you? There's a protest over a housing dispute in Brixton. Residents are marching to the council. Get over there now. We need the story up before 10 a.m. I looked at Miles dozing on the IV bed, a tiny cannula taped to the back of his little hand. Liam, my son has a high fever. I'm at the hospital. Can you assign someone else? There was a 2-second silence, followed by a familiar sigh. I know it's tough, Hannah, but everyone else is covering the warehouse fire. You took this beat from the start of the week. If you drop it now, you'll miss your quota by a mile. The paper isn't a charity, you know. That last sentence shut me up. A freelance contractor like me didn't have many choices, let alone the right to use my child's illness as an excuse too many times. The base salary was low. Getting paid for breaking news was what helped me cover the rent, nursery fees, medicine, and all the miscellaneous costs that left my wallet empty every month. I looked at Miles, then at the IV drip, half full, feeling as if 2 hands were tearing me in opposite directions. Just then, Dan walked past the end of the corridor. He was wearing his scrubs, carrying a clipboard, his kind face showing the slight fatigue of someone who had just finished a night shift. Seeing me, Dan stopped, his gaze immediately shifting to Miles. Fever again? I nodded, and before I could speak, he stepped over to check the IV line and the chart. He softened his voice. Just seasonal flu, no severe symptoms. Don't stress too much. The phrase don't stress sounds simple, but for a single mother, it's almost a luxury. I muted Liam on my phone, bit my lip for a moment, then said, Dan, we have an urgent assignment I need to run to for about an hour, 2 at most. Could you please keep an eye on Miles for me? I know I ask too much of you, but today, Dan didn't let me finish. He pulled up a chair next to the bed, checked the cooling patch on Miles's forehead, and said, Go. I'm just handing over my stack. Shift. I don't need to be in the clinic for a bit. I'll call you if anything happens. Dan's kindness always made me feel both grateful and guilty. 2 years ago, when Miles had a febrile seizure in the middle of the night, Dan was the A&E doctor. On duty. Later, knowing our situation, he often helped with small things, advising on medication, recommending cheaper clinics, or watching Miles. For a few dozen minutes when I was stuck, he never crossed any boundaries, but the eyes of outsiders never stay still. I knew some nurses thought Dan fancied me. Maybe he did. Or maybe they just liked turning goodwill into an easily a digestible piece of gossip. Before leaving, I bent down to whisper to Miles, Mummy has to go to work for a Lee Joe's. Little bit and we'll be right back. Be good for Uncle Dan, okay? Miles opened his eyes, his dry lips curling up slightly. Mummy, remember to buy strawberry yazoo. I will. I kissed his forehead, then turned to Dan and whispered, Call me. Immediately if anything happens. If he cries, just tell him. Mummy went to catch the tooth decay monster and he'll laugh. Dan chuckled softly. The tricks you two have are bizarre. I ran out of the hospital with my coat unzipped and my hair still damp from the mist. The protest took longer than expected. People shouted, council officials hid. The cameraman arrived late, and I was simultaneously recording audio and texting Dan to check on Miles. By the time I filed the story, it was past noon. I quickly bought a carton of strawberry yazoo and some porridge, then rushed back to the hospital, praying my son hadn't woken up crying for me. Miles was sleeping soundly in the chair, his IV bag nearly empty. Dan sat beside him reading a chart. Seeing me, he raised a hand to signal quiet. Fever broke. He woke up earlier asking for you. I told him you went to catch the tooth decay. Monster, he laughed and went back to sleep. A heavy weight lifted off my chest. I set the milk on the table and bowed my /Berklita. Had to thank him, my voice raspy from exhaustion. I owe you again. Oh, what? Dan took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I'm a doctor. Watching a sick kid for a bit is perfectly normal. Besides, Miles is a good boy, no trouble at all. I didn't know if it was the phrase, Miles is a good boy, that softened me, but just as I was about to say more, a shadow stopped at the doorway. A very strange sensation crawled up my neck, the feeling of someone staring at you for too long. I turned my head and, sure enough, Harry was standing in the corridor. Beside him was Tom, leaning on crutches, grimacing as if life had just kicked him in the leg. I'd only met Tom a few times after Harry and I started dating in university, but I remembered his bitter mouth very well. 5 years ago, Tom was Harry's best mate and one of the people present at the birthday party where I announced our please breakup. Afterward, he occasionally used strange numbers to text me reproachful messages calling me cruel, saying I embarrassed Harry, saying I didn't deserve his friend's love. Last night, Tom must have heard from Harry that I had a child, so the moment he saw me, his eyes scanned from my face down to Miles, and he smirked. Well, well, it's a small world. Just heard Harry say he ran into his ex, and today we get to meet the whole happy little family. Tom didn't speak loudly, but it was enough for people nearby to glance over. I didn't want to argue in a hospital, much less wake Miles. Therefore, the smile on my face was very faint. Is your leg injured or your mouth? You still speak. Rubbish even in a hospital. Dan let out a soft cough, probably trying not to laugh. Tom faltered. He was about to retort when Harry shot him a look, just one look, and Tom immediately shut up, looking like a dog whose owner had just yanked its leash. If I wasn't so tired, I might have found it funny. Harry's gaze shifted to Miles. Today, the boy wasn't hidden behind a coat. Even though he was sleeping on his side, his features were clearly visible. I realized it at the same moment he did. My shoulders tensed, and my hand instinctively grabbed the edge of my son's blanket, as if a thin sheet could hide a massive secret. Has his fever gone down? Harry asked. It has, I replied, purposely emphasizing every word. My son is fine. The words, my son, fell between us, as hard as a deadbolt locking. Harry heard it. Dan heard it. Only Tom didn't fully grasp it, looking back and forth with an obnoxious, gossip-hungry expression. Harry didn't react strongly, merely nodding. That politeness irritated me more than sarcasm. In the past, he was hot-tempered and stubborn. When he was like 17, jealous, his face was terrifying. But now he maintained boundaries so well that I didn't know where to strike back. Dan stood up and naturally picked up Miles's tote bag, handing it to me. My shift is done. Let me drive you two home. The sun is glaring out there. It'll be a hassle taking a cab with him. Before I could decline, Harry looked at Dan. The two men's eyes met in the plopling narrow space of the hospital corridor, not loudly but clearly unpleasantly. Dan remained gentle, while Harry was cold, displaying the demeanor of someone used to giving orders in a boardroom rather than engaging in casual conversation. Are you Hannah's husband? Harry asked. My heart jolted. If I had previously debated whether to explain, in that exact second, looking at Harry's tense face and Tom craning his neck to eavesdrop, I suddenly didn't want to tell the truth. I didn't need Dan to play any role, but I didn't have the courage to tear down the shield that had just dropped in front of me. Dan looked at me for a split second, a very short one, but I knew he understood my silence. He neither confirmed nor denied it, simply stating politely, I'm Dan, a doctor here. I've known Hannah and Miles for a long time. It was an impeccably diplomatic answer. Harry looked at me, his eyes darkening, while I looked down to adjust Miles's IV line to avoid his gaze. A small voice inside me said that doing this wasn't fair to Dan, nor to Harry, but a colder voice shot back. Fairness is a luxury that no one saved for me 5 years ago. Tom limped forward on his crutches, his voice less bitter but still undeniably nosy. So the kid. Tom. Harry said his name very softly, yet Tom immediately clamped his mouth shut, looking dumbfounded, seemingly remembering that he depended on the man currently driving him to his appointments. Right then, Miles woke up. He rubbed his eyes, saw me, gave a weak smile, then looked at Dan, his voice still hoarse. Uncle Dan, did Mummy buy the strawberry? Yizzo? Right here. I quickly popped the straw into the carton and handed it to my press stick. Son, trying to use my body to block Harry's line of sight. But Miles, completely unaware of the tension between the adults, took the carton and looked up at Harry with clear, innocent eyes. Mister, you're the one who drove Mummy and me home last night, right? That question made the entire corridor seem to slow down. Dan looked at me, Tom looked at Harry, and Harry looked at Miles. I just wanted to cover my son's mouth, but doing so would only expose me further. So I forced a smile. Yes. Mr. Harry is an old acquaintance of Mummy's. Say hello. Miles obediently held his milk carton and greeted him politely. Hello, Mr. Harry. Harry stepped a bit closer. At that distance, the two faces, one large, one small, were framed together, looking so similar that my heart felt like it was being squeezed. Harry must have noticed something too, but perhaps his rationale hadn't allowed him to go further yet. He bent down, his voice significantly softer than when he spoke to me. Your name is Miles? Yes, Miles Andrews. The boy answered very proudly, while my hands turned ice. Cold. I had taught him since he was a toddler to always say his full name when asked, because children need to know how to introduce themselves clearly. Today, that very lesson had turned into a knife slicing open the secret I had guarded. So carefully, Harry softly repeated, Miles Andrews. The surname Andrews caused his eyes to flicker. Maybe he thought about Miles taking his mother's surname. Maybe he just found it odd because if Dan, Dr. Daniel Clark, was the father, the boy shouldn't be named Andrews. I didn't know. I only knew I needed to get Miles out of there. As fast as possible. Dan, could you take the needle out for me? I'm taking him home, I said, turning away, actively avoiding Harry's eyes. Dan nodded and performed the procedure very gently. Miles was used to Uncle Dan, so he didn't cry, just grimaced a bit, and boasted that he was brave. Dan chuckled and ruffled his hair, his eyes so warm that even I felt comforted. Perhaps it was that exact moment that led Harry to a deeper misunderstanding, because as Dan picked up Miles's coat, Harry suddenly said, "Let me drive you. Home. It's on the way." I replied instantly, "No need. You're carrying a kid, carrying bags, and you've been running around working. All morning. If it's on the way, just let him drive you." "What's the big deal?" Tom chimed in, unclear if he was trying to help his mate or just wanted to watch the drama unfold. I glared at him. "Tom, if you have free time, worry about your leg, I'm afraid. If you stand too long, you'll be back in the hospital for another month. Then, Harry will have a hard time driving you to checkups and I'd feel terribly driving." "Guilty." Dan lowered his head, chuckling softly. Tom choked, his face turning red. Harry didn't laugh. He just looked at me with an indescribable expression, as if he had just seen the girl from years ago in a different form, pricklier, more exhausted, but not easily bullied. Ultimately, it was Dan who walked us down to the lobby. Harry didn't follow, but I knew he was still standing in the corridor looking down because I felt a lingering chill on my back. When we reached the hospital gates, the midday sun hit our faces. Dan carried the bags while Miles rested his head on my shoulder, his mouth still chewing on the empty straw. Dan suddenly said, "You don't need to use me as a shield, Hannah." I stopped in my tracks. Dan's kindness was always straightforward. It didn't hurt you, but it meant you couldn't hide. I looked at the passing traffic, offering a tired smile. "I'm sorry." At that moment, I didn't know what to say. "I'm not blaming you." Dan stood next to me, his voice as calm as when he explained medical charts to families. "It's just that the longer you hide something, the more it hurts the people involved when it comes out. When there's a child in the middle." I had no response. He was too right for me to argue. Miles had fallen back, asleep on my shoulder, his little hand still clutching my shirt. I looked down at my son, feeling a mix of love and terror. People often say it's better for a child to have a father, but no one tells a wounded mother what to do when that father returns, bringing a past still covered in thorns. That evening, Miles's fever had clearly broken, but he still needed IV fluids. For 2 more days as scheduled. I sat next to his bed, opening my laptop to edit the news piece I had rushed in earlier, but the words blurred on the screen. Liam texted to say the article was performing well. The bonus would be decent, but I felt no joy. My mind was consumed by Harry's look when Miles said his name, and Dan's reminder that hiding things for too long would only cause pain. At nearly 10 p.m., I received a text from an unsaved number. I didn't need a name. To guess who it was, the brevity was obnoxiously familiar. "Does he still need IVs tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long time. Replying felt like opening a door, not replying felt like fear. Finally, I locked the screen and tossed the phone onto the pillow, telling myself Harry had nothing to do with us. But just a few seconds later, the screen lit up again. This time, it was just one sentence. "If you need a lift, call me. I won't ask any questions." I won't ask any questions. Those 5 words made me chuckle bitterly. A man like Harry not asking questions meant he had either guessed something or was waiting for me to speak. Whichever it was, I hated it. I didn't reply. The night deepened. Miles slept peacefully beside me, and the rain started to patter against the balcony again. Over the last 5 years, during the nights my son had a fever, I had grown accustomed to taking his temperature myself, timing his medicine myself, and holding him until dawn myself. Harry's reappearance was like a hand reaching out. Just as I had learned, I didn't need anyone to catch me. And the most terrifying part wasn't that the hand arrived late, but that for a fleeting second, I actually wanted to grab it. The next morning, when I carried Miles back to the hospital, Harry and Tom were already standing near the orthopedic clinic. Tom leaned on his crutches, looking miserable. Harry wore a light blue shirt, holding 2 coffees and a carton of strawberry yazoo. I froze at the lift doors, suddenly realizing something very unpleasant. When certain people decide to reappear in your life, they don't need to be loud. They just stand exactly where you cannot avoid them. The coffee in Harry's hand steamed slightly, while the strawberry yazoo featured the exact same cartoon cow that Miles loved. I stared at that milk carton for a few seconds, an absurd question popping into my head. Is Tom really injured, or does Harry just have so much free time that he's researching other people's kids' preferences at the blank and decaying crack of dawn? Miles didn't overthink things like his mother. The moment he saw the strawberry, Yazoo, his eyes lit up, his face, still slightly pale from the fever, suddenly gained some life. He rested on my shoulder, his voice small but clear. "Mummy, look, my milk." I patted his back, trying to walk past as if I hadn't seen anything. Bring it in the cafeteria, I'll buy it in a bit." Harry didn't block our path, merely holding the milk out toward Miles, his voice so natural it felt as if we hadn't had a 5-year gap. "I bought an extra one. If Miles likes it, he can have it." "No need," I answered for my son faster than a reflex. Miles pursed his lips, looking at the milk and then at me. He clearly wanted it, but obediently didn't fuss. That obedience made my heart ache. Children from poor families, or those lacking adult backing, often learn to read their mother's face very early. Miles was only 4, but he already knew that if something made his mother uncomfortable, he shouldn't make a fuss. I used to be proud of his maturity, but lately I realized that when children mature too early, it's mostly because the adults haven't been able to give them a carefree life. Dan walked down from the end of the corridor, just as the atmosphere was about to freeze over. He looked at the milk in Harry's hand, then at me, keeping his voice gentle. "Hannah, take Miles in first. The IV room is packed today, but I saved a spot by the window for him." Dan's appearance was like a ladder for me to climb down from the awkward situation. I nodded, carrying Miles past them, but after just a few steps, Tom muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It's just a carton of milk, why? Guard it like a thief? People might think Harry's trying to kidnap the kid." I stopped. Normally, I might have let it slide, but after 2 sleepless nights and a morning of finding my ex waiting at the hospital, my patience was as thin as wet tissue paper. I turned around and looked straight at Tom. "Tom, children aren't props for adults to test each other. A carton of milk isn't worth much, but who is giving it? In what context? I have the right to consider that. If your leg hurts, get it checked. Don't use the opportunity to examine my parenting skills." Tom opened his mouth, then shut it. Harry stood silently beside him, his eyes resting on my face for a very long time. I knew I spoke harshly, but I didn't regret it. Over the last 5 years, too many people felt entitled to judge me. Neighbors asked why they never saw the father. Colleagues said women with young kids shouldn't take demanding beats. Distant relatives said I was too stubborn. For my own good. Everyone only saw a fragment of my life and judged my entire being. Tom was just one more. Inside the IV room, Dan helped Miles onto a chair, while I opened my bag for the Planey health records. The boy seemed better than yesterday. Though still tired, he was starting to look around curiously. When the nurse came to insert the needle, Miles grimaced, his free hand finding mine and squeezing tight. Dan leaned down and joked, "We're the tooth decay monster hunters, remember? Are we scared of a tiny needle?" "I'm not scared." His mouth said he wasn't, but his eyes were red. I leaned close, touching my forehead to his, whispering that Mummy was here, Uncle Dan was here, and the pain would pass in a second. As the needle went in, Miles trembled but didn't cry. I felt a mix of sympathy and amusement because that stubborn, lip-biting expression of endurance looked exactly like Harry whenever I used to get mad at him and he tried to pretend he wasn't wrong. The moment that thought appeared, I felt irritated. Why did I see his shadow everywhere? From Miles's eyes, his stubborn posture, to the way he tried not to cry in front of strangers. There are truths that, no matter how much you cover them with coats, lies, or 5 years of silence, will still seep out through the smallest details. Dan had a shift, so he left after reminding me to watch the drip rate. I sat next to Miles, taking out my phone to reply to work emails. Liam was rushing me, again about attending a corporate dinner this weekend, claiming that an exclusive interview with Apex Holdings would guarantee we smashed our monthly quota. The name Apex Holdings stabbed my eyes. London is massive, but when fate wants to play a joke, it can shrink the entire city down to a single name. About 10 minutes later, Harry walked into the IV room. Tom wasn't with him. He was probably stuck in X-ray, or Harry had just ditched him somewhere to stop him from gossiping. In his hand was the same strawberry Yazoo, but this time he didn't hand it to me. He placed it on the small table next to Miles's bag, just far enough away so it didn't feel forceful. "I'll leave it here. If you don't want him to drink it, you can bin it later," Harry said, pulling up a chair and sitting a short distance away from us. He didn't bombard me with questions, didn't mention Dan, and didn't stare at Miles. Brazenly like yesterday. This restraint should have been comforting, but it made me anxious. The old Harry was most terrifying when he was quiet. Miles looked at the milk and swallowed quietly. I sighed, finally popping the straw in and handing it to him. Drink it, but you have to say thank you. The boy instantly smiled, his pale cheeks lifting. Thank you, Mr. Harry. Harry looked at that smile, his body freezing slightly. I could clearly see the worry. Expression of a man unexpectedly struck in the heart by something incredibly soft. It didn't bleed, but it ached. He leaned forward, trying to keep his voice. Normal, you're welcome. Do you like strawberry milk? Yeah, but Mummy says drinking too much causes tooth decay. Uncle Dan says there are monsters that drill into your teeth. They're super scary. Miles took a sip and seriously shared his knowledge like an old man. Harry chuckled softly. It was a very light sound, but it made me zone out for a second because it had been a very long time since I'd heard him laugh like that. Not a polite corporate laugh nor a cold, mocking one, but the kind of laugh I had when we sat eating greasy kebabs outside uni, tears in my eyes from the chili sauce, yet still trying to eat more. Then you have to brush your teeth very well, Harry said. I brush them very well. Mummy checks every night, Miles replied then, as if, remembering something, looked up and asked, Are you really Mummy's friend? I instantly interrupted. Miles, drink your milk. But once a child gets curious, one sentence isn't enough to stop them. Miles looked at me, then at Harry, asking innocently, Mummy said you're an old acquaintance. Is an old acquaintance a friend? Harry didn't answer immediately. He glanced at me for a second, as if waiting to see if I would forbid it. I stiffened, but ultimately said nothing. There are answers that, if you don't provide them, people will invent themselves. And my biggest fear wasn't Harry lying to Miles. It was him telling the truth in a way I wasn't ready to hear. A long time ago, I was very close with your mummy. Harry chose a safe answer, his voice softening. You could call me an old friend. Miles nodded as if he completely understood, then casually asked, So, do you know my daddy too? I squeezed the milk carton in my hand so hard it almost spilled, my heart plummeting to the bottom of my chest. Harry looked up at me. The IV room was still, noisy kids crying, adults chatting, medicine trolleys squeaking down a hall, yet between us, there was a thick, suffocating silence. Harry asked very softly, Do you want to know about your daddy, Miles? Miles looked down at his milk, his voice dropping. At nursery, the other kids have their daddies pick them up. I only have Mummy, sometimes Uncle Dan, or Mrs. Higgins next door. I asked Mummy where Daddy is. Mummy said Daddy went far away. I closed my eyes for a second. His words held no resentment, but because they held no resentment, they hurt even more. I had prepared many answers for the day. Miles asked about his father. Daddy is busy. Daddy is far away. Daddy lost his way home. But none of them were kind enough. A child shouldn't have to carry the bitterness of adults to understand his father's absence. Harry sat up straighter. He kept his voice steady, but his hands resting on his dode. Knees had balled into fists. So Uncle Dan isn't your daddy? Miles shook his head immediately, so honest it made me want to cry. No. Uncle. Dan is just Mummy's friend. He checks my illnesses and buys me porridge. But he doesn't sleep at our house. I've never met my daddy. I put my hand on Miles's shoulder, trying to cut in with the softest voice possible. Drink your milk, talking too much will make you tired. But Mr. Harry asked, Mummy. The boy looked at me with crystal clear eyes, completely unaware that every word he spoke was peeling back the layers I had spent years building. Then he turned back to Harry, as if afraid the adults were misunderstanding. My mummy doesn't have a husband. She just said that, yesterday, if the ground beneath my feet cracked open, I would dive in without an umsabertine. Invitation. Harry looked at me, his gaze shifting from shock to something deeper, sharper. I heard myself exhale softly, but my chest felt crushed by a boulder. Harry didn't question me immediately. He leaned down and looked at Miles, his voice slightly hoarse. So, did Mummy tell you what kind of person your daddy is? I shot up from my chair. Harry, that's enough! But my son was faster. He held the milk carton with both hands and seriously told the man sitting in front of him. Mummy said Daddy is someone who makes Mummy cry, he's a massive jerk. My throat locked up for a moment. I didn't know whether to laugh because the boy had used the exact words I had let slip when I was angry, or cry because the man, being called a massive jerk, was sitting right in front of him, his eyes darkening as if he had just been slapped. Harry looked at me, this time not through a mirror, not separated by a raincoat. Or a lie. He looked straight at me, close enough that I could see his eyes held not just anger, but a suppressed agony. I know what you're thinking, I said. You probably think I met some terrible man, got dumped, raised a child on my own, and that's why I'm so bitter. You're probably wanting to ask for that bloke's name, wanting to do something to prove you still have some relevance in my life. You can't imagine that life is so hilariously cruel that the man is actually you. My phone vibrated, saving me just in time. Liam's name flashed on the screen. Again, I grabbed the call like a drowning person grabbing a life buoy, but when I answered, Liam's voice made me want to throw the buoy back into the water. Hannah, you need to come to the office for a quick meeting this afternoon. Apex. Holdings confirmed we can schedule the interview this week, but before that, there's a client dinner tomorrow night. You're coming with me. Dress smart? Don't let them think our paper lacks professionalism. I closed my eyes, muttered I know, and hung up. When I turned back, Harry was still looking at me. Miles had almost finished his milk, looking carefree, as if he had just completed a very normal task. I couldn't blame my son. From start to finish, I was the one lying. I was the one who left him in the void. I have to step out for a work call, I said. Even though the call is done, please don't ask him about those things anymore. Harry stood up, his voice low. Hannah, how exactly have you lived these past 5 years? That question made my eyes sting. Not because it was out of line, but because it was too late. How had I lived for 5 years? I lived by counting every penny, hunting for discount codes for nappies, biting my lip as I held my son through. Feverish nights, smiling at neighbors when they asked why the father never came. Home, bowing my head to editors when assigned tasks right before school pickup. I lived by not allowing myself to fall because if I fell, Miles would have no one. But in front of Harry, I simply replied, I lived normally. People survive just fine without you. Saying that, I picked Miles up though. He was still attached to the IV, so I could only shift him slightly and pulled the chair closer, creating a clear, physical distance between Harry and my son. Harry watched the movement and didn't press further. He slowly backed away, but before leaving the room, he dropped one last sentence behind me. I don't know what that man did to you, but if you need it, I can help. I almost laughed. Help me take revenge on yourself? The thought was so venomous I instantly hated myself for it, but I couldn't deny its dark humor. Harry knew nothing. He didn't know the boy had just called his own father a crater's massive jerk. He didn't know the mother sitting there had once taken a 1-2 hour overnight coach, clutching her pregnant stomach just to find him. He didn't know a single phone call had turned our love to cold ash. Miles tugged on my sleeve, asking quietly, Mummy, did I say something wrong? I looked down and saw a bit of fear in his eyes. Perhaps he sensed the adults. I had suddenly tensed up over his words. I pulled him into a hug, careful not to disturb his IV, and spoke softly. No, you didn't do anything wrong. It's just that grown-up stuff is a bit hard to talk about. Is Mr. Harry sad, Mummy? I looked toward the door, where Harry's silhouette had just disappeared into the crowd. Probably. Because I said Daddy is a massive jerk? This time, I couldn't hold back. I felt both pain and a wry amusement. I tapped his nose gently. Yeah, don't use that word with strangers anymore. The things Mummy says when she's angry aren't good things to learn. Miles nodded obediently. Children forget quickly. Less than 10 minutes later, he was glued to cartoons on my phone, occasionally giggling. Meanwhile, I sat beside him, watching the IV drip, my mind as tangled as a ball of yarn clawed by a cat. The lies had started to fray. Dan wasn't my husband. Miles had never met his father. I had no marriage to use as a shield. And Harry, despite not knowing, the truth had stepped far too close to the boundary I had drawn. That afternoon, when Miles finished his IV, I took him home without seeing Harry. Again, Tom had also vanished, probably driven home by someone or hobbling off to I find other gossip. Outside the hospital gates, the late afternoon sun faded on. The damp road. I ordered a black cab, holding Miles in the back seat. This time, I checked the license plate so thoroughly that the driver laughed and asked if I was prone to getting in the wrong car. I laughed it off, but my heart sank. Getting into the wrong cab just costs a cancellation fee. Getting into an ex's. Life could cost the secret I had kept for 5 years. That evening, Miles ate half a bowl of porridge and fell asleep. I quickly washed towels, rinsed water bottles, and hung his hospital-smelling coat out on the balcony. The phone on the table buzzed once, then again. Harry's message popped up. I'm sorry for asking Miles too many questions. A moment later, another one. But Hannah, you don't look like someone who has forgotten everything. If something happened back then, I want to know. I stared at the message for a long time. Want to know. Those words sounded so easy. He only wanted to know. I had to live with it through my entire youth. I didn't reply. I opened my laptop to edit an article, but I'd barely typed a few lines when Miles suddenly called out in his sleep. Mummy, Daddy. My fingers froze on the keyboard. The small flat was filled only with the hum of the desk fan and the distant sound of traffic. I walked over and pulled the blanket up for him, noticing his lips pursed, unaware of what he was dreaming about. A child who had never met his father was calling for him in his sleep. That simple utterance softened every defense in my heart, softened it to a terrifying degree. The next morning, I decided to switch hospitals for Miles's follow-up, but things didn't go as planned. As soon as I arrived at the office to submit my article and ask for the morning off, Liam called me into his office, slamming a prodded file on Apex Holdings in front of me. He enthusiastically explained that the JNU chance to interview Harry Davenport didn't come easy. Tonight, I had to attend the client dinner, observe, and network. If we were lucky, the exclusive interview would be the highlight of the month's business section. I stared at the name Harry Davenport printed on the file, my head ringing. I couldn't hide at the hospital, and I couldn't hide at work. Harry was walking into my life through every logical avenue, from my son, to my job, to the silences I thought I had locked away. Late that afternoon, when I returned to the hospital to get Miles's old appointment slips, Dan was standing at the clinic door looking slightly worried. He didn't ask much, just handed me the papers and advised, if you're changing hospitals, make sure to take his test results. I thanked him. I was about to leave when Dan looked over my shoulder, his expression pausing for a second. I turned around. Harry was standing at the end of the corridor, not in a suit this time, but in a rolled-up shirt, the exhaustion clear under his eyes. Beside him was Tom on his crutches, but Tom wasn't smirking anymore. Harry's eyes dropped to the papers in my hand, then slowly shifted to Dan. The hospital corridor was crowded, yet I heard his voice perfectly clearly when he asked, Hannah, are you planning to take Miles somewhere else to avoid me? I gripped the papers, but before I could answer, my phone rang again. It was Liam, his voice so rushed it was practically a shout. Hannah, get ready. Tonight isn't just a client meet and greet. Apex just confirmed Harry Davenport himself will be there. This is your chance. I looked at Harry standing in front of me, then at the lit screen. A chance? Liam called it that, but to me, it didn't feel like an opportunity. It felt like a door I was desperately trying to shut. And just before the latch clicked, the person outside had grabbed the handle. Even scarier was that he didn't need to push hard. Just standing there was enough to throw me into chaos. That evening, riding in the company car to the restaurant in Mayfair, I looked at my reflection in the window and found it laughable. My white blouse was perfectly ironed, my hair tied back neatly, a bit of lipstick applied to hide. The pallor, looking every bit the professional journalist. But inside my handbag lay a cooling gel patch, baby wipes, and a small strawberry yazoo, just in case. I got home late and had to pick Miles up on the way. Liam sat in the front seat, texting away while repeatedly reminding me that tonight was just an introduction, not a deep interview. I needed to be tactful, observe, speak little, and not lose favor with the Apex team. He made it sound like he was handing me a plate of gold, but to me the name Harry Davenport felt like someone picking at an old scab with a fingernail for the past 48 hours. I had thought I was numb enough to face my ex, but just my son calling out for his dad in a dream turned everything to mush. The restaurant was on the top floor of a sleek hotel overlooking the city. The glass was so polished it reflected every crease of the waiters' uniforms. The private dining room featured a large round table, leather chairs, the smell of expensive wine, and men's cologne, the kind of space where people laugh loudly. But no one is truly comfortable. I chose a seat near the door, placed my notebook beside me, and told myself that if I could just get through tonight and secure the interview schedule, I would treat it as a normal job. We were adults. I couldn't throw away my paycheck because of an ex. Nor could I let Miles miss next month's school trip because of an old wound. The clients were mostly there. Besides the Apex executives, there were a few PR reps involved in the project. Harry hadn't arrived yet, which let me exhale. Slightly, though the relief was short-lived. A stocky, balding man, Mr. Carter sat down and immediately looked at me with the kind of gaze that women who have worked in the industry for years recognize in a split second. Liam introduced me as the feature journalist. Carter immediately laughed and reached out to shake my hand, holding it a bit longer than necessary. Journalist Hannah, you're so young to be covering corporate. Impressive. You'll have to have a drink with me tonight so we can get acquainted. I withdrew my hand naturally, offering a polite smile. My tolerance is terrible, Mr. Carter. I hope you understand. I can type my notes much faster on sparkling water. The table chuckled, some out of politeness, some finding the joke harmless, but Carter wasn't about to let it go. Dark red wine was poured into the glasses in front of everyone. I stared at my glass, my stomach already churning despite not having had a drop. Years in journalism had taught me that some business meetings were actually endurance tests. If a young woman with her male boss refuses to drink, she's seen as stuck up. If she drinks, it's expected. If she gets drunk, it's her own fault. Liam leaned over and whispered, his tone soft but the pressure immense. Hannah, try your best. If they're happy tonight, the interview is guaranteed tomorrow. You know what we need this month. I knew. I knew the rent was due. I knew Miles's medical bills had spiked. I knew the nursery had just asked for a field trip fee, even though I wasn't sure he'd on. I could go, so I picked up the glass, clinked it lightly with everyone, and took a sip. The wine burned down my throat, leaving a harsh, astringent taste. Carter clapped, praising my spirit. Less than 10 minutes later, a second glass was pushed toward me. The dinner dragged on amid laughter and half-joking banter. They discussed clean PR, corporate responsibility, and public image, but the hand pouring the wine was never clean or decent toward the woman sitting. Opposite. By the time I finished my third glass, my head felt heavy and my stomach was in knots. Every time I set the glass down, the image of Miles on the IV drip flashed in my mind like a rope pulling me back from collapsing. I wasn't the type to play the victim, but sometimes putting food on the table really leaves you without any pretty options. When Carter pushed another full glass in front of me, I placed my hand over the Paisley rim, trying to keep my voice polite. Mr. Carter, I truly can't drink anymore. I have to work tomorrow, please understand. He laughed a creepy, skin-crawling laugh. You can't be a journalist and have a weak stomach. One more glass, consider it a favor to me. Down this, and I promise to send you all the files tomorrow. Liam looked at me, a mix of anxiety and warning in his eyes. I knew he wasn't a bad person. He was just so accustomed to this system that he forgot the person drinking on his behalf had a stomach, a young child waiting at home, and self-respect that was being ground away bit by bit. Carter's hand was already forcing the glass into mine, the wine sloshing, the smell of alcohol making me want to gag. Just then, another hand reached over, snatched the glass from my grip, and slammed it onto the table. The sound of the glass bottom hitting the surface was sharp and cold. The noisy room instantly fell dead silent. Harry stood behind my chair in a black dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to the prestings, elbows, his face expressionless, but his eyes were so cold that Carter's smile froze on his face. He scanned the table, his gaze finally resting on the wine glass. His voice was very low. She said she wasn't drinking anymore. Are you Elde? The atmosphere shifted instantly. Liam jumped up so fast his chair almost tipped, stuttering. Mr. Davenport, you're here. It's just a misunderstanding. We were just having a bit of fun. No one is forcing Hannah. Harry didn't look at Liam, nor did he sit down. His silence made the men who were laughing moments ago exchange nervous glances. Carter tried to save face, forcing a laugh. Mr. Davenport, you're taking it too seriously. We just Hannah, that's why we offered. Business needs a bit of atmosphere, right? Your idea of atmosphere is forcing a woman to drink until she turns pale? Harry asked, his voice steady, but the steadier it was, the more chilling it felt. If Apex's project relies on forcing drinks down someone's throat to get good PR, then this project ends tonight. That statement was heavy, so heavy that Carter turned white, and Liam didn't even dare to breathe loudly. I looked up at Harry. The alcohol made his image slightly blurry, but his silhouette blocking the lights was incredibly sharp. 5 years ago, when I needed him most, he wasn't there. 5 years later, in a room full of strangers, he stood up for me in a way that left no room for anyone to make excuses. The feeling was both warm and humiliating, making me even less willing to accept it. I gripped the edge of the table and stood up, trying to balance. Excuse me, everyone. I'm feeling unwell. I'm going to head home. No one stopped me and no one dared to. When I walked out, Harry followed right behind me, but he didn't touch me. He just kept enough distance so that if I stumbled, he could catch me. That belated consideration annoyed me more than his arrogance, because it gave me no excuse to get angry at him. The hotel corridor was glaringly bright. The polished marble floor made my heels click loudly. As we neared the lifts, my stomach cramped so hard I had to lean against the wall. Harry handed me a bottle of water, the cap already unscrewed. Take a sip. I'm not so far gone that I need a babysitter, I said, my voice weaker than I intended. I know, Harry replied without arguing. But you're shaking. One short sentence pulled me back to days long gone. The old Harry used to notice these tiny details too. If I was mad, he knew from the way I pursed my lips. If I was sad, he knew because I ate slower. If I was cold, he knew before. I even hunched my shoulders, because he used to understand me so well. The misunderstanding 5 years ago hurt that much more. How could someone who noticed every little shiver not realize I had cried myself dry that night? I took the bottle, drank a sip to soothe my burning throat, and handed it back. Thank you, I could have handled that myself. Harry looked at me, his voice slightly rough. Handled it by drinking until you threw up? That's my job. Work doesn't care if you feel humiliated. I let out a bitter laugh, the alcohol making it sound more cynical than usual. Mr. Davenport sounds so posh. People with the power to choose can easily say what should or shouldn't happen. But people who have to pay rent at the end of the month usually only get to ask, can I endure this? Not, is this worth it? Harry stayed silent. I knew that sentence stabbed him, or at least stabbed the gap between who we were now. He was a man who could halt a project and silence a boardroom, who could hand out a black business card and say, call me if you need anything. I was someone who had to calculate if an evening of forced drinking would earn enough to buy medicine and pay school fees. 5 years didn't just create a child. It created 2 lives on entirely different social strata. The lift doors opened. I was about to step in when the sound of high heels approached from the opposite side. A woman in a cream-colored pantsuit, her hair in a low bun with elegant makeup, stopped in front of us. She was beautiful in a way that showed she knew it, posture straight, smile perfectly polite. But the moment she saw me, the corners of her eyes twitched slightly. Just a fraction of a second. Someone who hadn't been traumatized by her might not have noticed, but I did. Because there are voices and faces that, even if they only appear in your life once, become a splinter buried deep under your skin for years. Natalie. 5 years ago, in the lobby of Harry's company, I had seen a photo of her, sitting next to him at a team-building event. That night, I called Harry using all the courage left in a girl who had just discovered she was pregnant, and it was her voice that answered the phone, calmly claiming to be his girlfriend. For 5 years, I had tried to forget that face, but memory doesn't disappear. It just sits quietly waiting for the right moment to stand up. Natalie smiled first, her tone immaculate. Harry, everyone is waiting for you. You were out so long I came to check. She then turned to me, the smile unbroken. Hello, you must be the journalist from... I looked at her, the alcohol in my system instantly sobering by half. Some people only need to appear to make you completely sober. I smiled back and said, slowly, hello, Natalie. Long time no see. The smile on Natalie's face froze. Harry immediately looked at me, clear. Surprise on his face. You know Natalie? I do, I replied, my eyes locked on the woman in front of me. 5 years? Over 1,800 days. If I can still remember her voice, remembering her name isn't strange. Natalie recovered her composure very quickly, but her grip on her phone tightened. She looked at Harry, then at me, her voice softening. I think you're mistaken, Hannah. We've never actually met in person before. True, we haven't met in person. I nodded, my chest feeling both cold and bitterly amused. I only ever saw your photo and heard your voice over the phone. That was impressive enough. Harry stood between us, his expression shifting. He wasn't slow. The phrase, heard your voice over the phone, was enough to pull out a lot of implications, especially coming from the woman who vanished from his life exactly 5 years ago. He turned to Natalie, his voice dropping. What is she talking about? Natalie didn't answer right away. She gave me a deeply covert, warning look, wanting to remind me not to speak here. If I were the 2-3-year-old Hannah, I probably would have trembled, feeling out of place between two people from the place for 7A2, same world. But the Hannah of today had given birth alone, sat up all night in a plastic hospital chair with a feverish child, and smiled through a table full of men forcing her to drink. A look from Natalie was no longer enough to scare me. I stepped into the lift. Just before the doors closed, I looked at Harry and gave a faint smile. If you want to know what happened that year, ask Natalie. Ask her under what title she answered your phone. The lift doors shut, slicing Harry's stunned face and Natalie's pale complexion into a brilliant straight line. As the lift descended, I leaned against the wall, my hand holding the water bottle trembling slightly. The alcohol, the exhaustion, the anger, and an old, deeply buried pain being dug up made my eyes burn. I had always thought that if I ever saw Natalie again, I would charge at her, demand an explanation, and make a scene to make up for the night I cried like an idiot. But when I actually faced her, I only felt tired. Stepping out of the hotel, the night wind hit my face. My phone had several .c missed calls from Liam, which I ignored. There was a text from Dan saying Miles had eaten his porridge and was asleep, and Mrs. Higgins was watching him. Don't worry, get home safe. Reading that, my throat choked up. While I was being dragged through the past in a hotel corridor, my real life was waiting in that small flat where my son needed his mother to pull up his blanket, give him his medicine, and hold him. In the middle of the night, I caught a black cab, this time checking the license plate meticulously. Shortly after the cab drove off, my phone lit up. Harry was calling. I stared at the screen until it went dark, and then it lit up again. Finally, a text appeared. Hannah, don't sleep yet. I need to know what you heard that year. I looked at the text and laughed softly in the dark. 5 years ago, I also needed to know. But when the call connected, the person answering was Natalie, and the person who was supposed to explain it to me was too far away, so far that a pregnant girl couldn't reach him. That night, I didn't reply to Harry. Miles was sleeping soundly, his cheek pressed into the pillow, his breathing even. Mrs. Higgins had left a small pot of porridge on the stove and gone home at some point. I changed, washed my face, drank a glass of warm water, and sat by my son's bed until 2 a.m. My mind was empty, but my heart ached with a dull throb, like an old wound aching when the weather changes. The next morning, the official interview still went ahead. That's life. You don't halt your professional schedule just because a slightly tipsy woman runs into her old rival, and a publication doesn't drop an exclusive just because a journalist's heart is in tatters. Liam texted early, his tone still buzzing with excitement. Hannah, there was a bit of a hiccup last night, but Harry didn't cancel. Means they still respect us. Prepare well. You need to be perfectly professional. Today, I read the word professional and wanted to laugh. Being a working adult means that even if you were forced to drink the night before, blocked and interrogated by your ex and ran into the woman who ruined your youth, you still have to wake up, put on an ironed shirt and lipstick, hold a dictaphone, and ask in a polite voice, "So, Mr. Davenport, what is the strategic direction for the group in the coming phase?" It sounds both funny and pathetic, but nobody pays you for your tears. They only pay for the article submitted on deadline. I dropped Miles off at the nursery once his fever was completely gone, reminding the teacher to call me immediately if he looked tired. At the gates, Miles hugged my neck and whispered, "Mummy, work hard and be a good girl." That was usually what I said to him. I didn't know when he'd memorized it to tell me back. I laughed and kissed his cheek. "I will, and you be a good boy at school. Will you pick me up or Uncle Dan?" "I will," I replied quickly, then felt I sounded a bit too eager. Miles didn't notice, just nodded, and ran into the classroom. His tiny silhouette across the playground made me pause. If it weren't for Miles, I probably would have left London the morning after I ran into Harry. But also because of Miles, I couldn't keep running. Some questions don't disappear just because I dodge them, especially when they involve a child's right to know his father. Apex Holdings was located in a glass skyscraper in central London, with its own private lifts. The receptionist spoke softly, and everything was so pristine, and ordered that a journalist used to chasing local housing disputes like me felt as if I brought the street dust in with me. The boardroom reserved for the interview wasn't huge, a long table, two small cameras, and the corporate branding on the wall behind. Harry arrived exactly on time, wearing a gray suit, no tie. There were faint dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept much either. We greeted each other like professionals. No one mentioned last night. No one mentioned Natalie. Liam was incredibly pleased with this composure, while I only felt exhausted. People can be so easily polite to one another, even when both are hiding a pile of wreckage inside. The interview began with the prepared questions. I asked about Apex's direction in satellite town projects, their commitment to affordable housing quotas, and corporate responsibility in regenerating old council estates. Harry answered, concisely, clearly, and straight to the point. If you only listened to the first half, you wouldn't believe this was the same man who had stood in a hotel corridor last night asking me what I heard. By the fifth question, I looked down at my notes, keeping my voice steady. Recently, Apex has expanded into community PR and urban lifestyle projects. Could you share the development plans for the next 2 years? Harry leaned back in his chair, the cameras still rolling. Liam sat beside me, nodding, waiting for a beautiful corporate answer. But Harry looked at me, not the lens, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. The corporate plans will be sent to you fully by our PR department. But my personal plans, if you're asking, I can summarize quite simply. My most important project right now is winning back my first love. I felt a bad premonition instantly. We are discussing corporate strategy here. A corporation is run by people, he replied calmly. The room froze. The cameraman looked up from his monitor. The Apex PR girl's eyes went wide, and Liam's expression shifted from confusion to absolute shock, but he didn't dare cut the camera. I held my pen, the tip resting on the paper, feeling as if Harry had just placed a firework on the boardroom table and lit it with the utmost politeness. I tried to drag it back to business, so we can understand that you are emphasizing the human element in your brand strategy. You could say that, Harry nodded, still looking at me. But honestly, I used to love a girl. Loved her so much that after losing her, I haven't started over with anyone else for 5 years. I don't know if I still have a chance, and I don't know if she's willing to listen to my explanation, but I want to try. The cameras were still blinking red. I could hear my own heart pounding, and even the sound of Liam swallowing hard next to me. Part of me wanted to stand up and switch the cameras off. Another part was trapped in a professional shell. I forced to offer a tight smile as if this were just a manageable off-topic remark. I'm sure your personal story will be of great interest to many readers, I said, forcing the words through a dry throat. But to return to our main topic, Apex plans to recruit more personnel for upcoming projects. Will you be directly involved in HR orientation? Harry looked at me for a few more seconds before suddenly smiling, a very faint smile. Not directly. I am only directly pursuing the person I need to pursue. The PR girl coughed softly and looked down. Liam's face lit up like someone who had just struck clickbait gold. I knew exactly what headlines were running through his head. Businessman Harry Davenport reveals first love after 5 years. Single. As for me, sitting across from Harry, I just wanted to throw my notebook at him. This man used to be arrogant, and 5 years later, he was still arrogant. The only difference was that now he wrapped his arrogance in a layer of politeness that made it impossible to blow up at him. I closed my notebook keeping my professional smile until the last second. Thank you, Mr. Davenport. We will send the draft for fact-checking before fact-checking before fact-checking before fact-checking. Publication. As soon as the interview ended, Liam pulled me into a corner, his eyes shining. Like headlights. Hannah, do you actually know Harry? No, seriously. If you're his first love, this article is going to explode. We can do a profile piece. Very raw, very emotional. I cut him off, my voice not loud but firm. Liam, I'm a journalist, not the subject of the article. If my private life is dragged into this piece without my consent, I will pull my name from the assignment. Liam was stunned. He probably didn't expect someone who usually swallowed difficult assignments like me to react so strongly, but I couldn't let my life become snacks for others to chew on, especially when Miles was part of that story. The boy hadn't asked to be born into the middle of adult misunderstandings, and he certainly didn't deserve to be dragged into half-true rumors. That afternoon, the rumors spread faster than I expected. In the office group chat, some vaguely asked, Hannah's been hiding her talents. No wonder Apex gave us the interview. Someone joked that to be a journalist these days, besides writing well, you needed high-quality X's. I read them, my heart going cold. The jokes weren't malicious, but they coated all my hard work in a layer of frivolous suspicion, as if my years of chasing news through rain and shine were worth less than the look Harry gave me in a boardroom. Near clocking off time, I went down to the lobby and saw the familiar black car, parked across the street. This time I didn't get in by mistake, nor could I pretend not to see it. Harry was standing next to the car, holding a small paper bag, looking as calm as if waiting for someone was an everyday routine. Colleagues walking past looked at me, then at him, their curiosity so blatant. I just wanted to disappear. I walked over quickly, keeping my voice low. Do you know what you're doing? Waiting for you, Harry replied. That's not what I asked. I asked if you realize the trouble you're causing me. The things you said on camera this morning, and now standing outside my office. What do you want people to think? Harry looked at me unflinching. I want them to know I'm pursuing you. The blunt answer left me choking. A motorbike zoomed past, splashing dirty water onto the curb. I stepped back half a pace. Harry immediately reached out and pulled me inward, his movement fast but not overly rough. The moment his hand touched my wrist, my entire body tensed. He noticed and immediately let go. His letting go only made me angrier. I'd rather he stayed arrogant so I had an excuse to shout at him, instead of him carefully correcting every little boundary as if genuinely trying to learn how to step closer. Harry, listen clearly. I looked at him, emphasizing every word. I am not the bling girl standing in that karaoke room 5 years ago letting you and your mates stare at me like I ruined the party. I have a child, a job, and a life that, while not posh, is stable. Stop using the tactics of someone with money and power to turn everything upside down and call it pursuing. Harry's eyes darkened. A moment later, he said very softly, Then tell me what to do. I don't show up, you avoid me. I text, you don't reply. I ask about 5 years ago, you stay silent. Hannah, you lock me out of everything and then blames me for not knowing how to get in. That silenced me. The afternoon wind blew through the trees outside the office, carrying the smell of exhaust fumes and city dust. I suddenly felt bone-tired. Perhaps we were both right in our own ways, and that was exactly why everything was so agonizing. Harry wanted to know, wanted to make amends, wanted to get back together, while I wanted to protect Miles, protect the hard-won peace I had, protect the fragments of self-respect I had picked up after the breakup. He held the paper bag out. Stomach medicine. You drank a lot last night, you look pale this morning. It's not a gift, I'm not trying to buy you. If you don't want it, bin it. I looked at the bag but didn't reach for it. From behind, a few colleagues walked out, their chatter dying down when they saw us. Their stares sobered me completely. If I took it, there would be more gossip tomorrow. If I didn't, Harry would just keep standing there. Finally, I exhaled and took the bag, not because I softened, but because I wanted to end this scene as quickly as possible. This is the last time you come to my office, I said. If it's about work, go. Through your secretary. If it's personal, it's best we don't. Harry looked at my hand holding the medicine. And if the personal matter is About what happened 5 years ago? Then we still don't need to, I replied, colder than I intended. Because even if you know about those 5 years, they aren't coming back. I turned to leave, but Harry called my name. His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to slow my steps. Hannah, last night you said you heard Natalie's voice on the phone, I asked. They're her, and she said she doesn't remember clearly. I don't believe her. Tonight, I will make her explain it clearly in front of you, if you want. I turned back to look at him. A part of me trembled at that sentence. 5 years ago, I had wished for someone to stand in front of me and say they would demand the truth. But 5 years ago, there was no one. Now, when that sentence arrived, it felt like an umbrella offered to someone who had already walked. Through a hurricane kind, but too late. I don't want to see her, I said. Harry stayed silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Then I'll find another way. I thought the story ended there, but that night, after I picked up Miles and was preparing dinner, my phone rang again. It wasn't Harry, Liam, or Dan. The screen showed an unknown number. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. And as soon as the clear, restrained female voice spoke, a chill ran down my spine. Is this Hannah? This is Natalie. Can we meet for a bit? There's something concerning Harry and your child. I think you should hear it. My hand gripped the phone tight. In the kitchen, a pot of boiling water spilled. Over onto the gas hob, hissing loudly. The sound yanked me back to the present. Miles was sitting in the living room playing with Lego, humming a song he learned at nursery, completely out of tune. I looked at my son, then at the phone, feeling that the door to 5 years ago hadn't just been cracked open. Someone was standing inside, directly calling out my child's name. And with just that one sentence, Natalie successfully made my hands go ice cold in the middle of a steamy kitchen. The boiling water hissed as it hit the blue flame. Outside in the living room, Miles happily held up a lopsided Lego house to show a one-eared teddy bear. The boy didn't know his name was being used as a bargaining chip, didn't know the why. Man who bought him Strawberry Yazoo could be the reason his little world was about to be flipped upside down. That ignorance fueled my anger. I spoke very slowly. Natalie, whatever you want to say about Harry and me, say it. But do not mention my son's name with that tone, as if you have the right to decide what's best for him. The other end was quiet for a beat, then she lowered her voice. This isn't something to discuss over the phone. I know you don't like me, but you should. Think about your son. Miles is still small. If you let Harry get tangled up in this, you won't be the only one suffering later. My son's name coming from her mouth for the second time shattered my final layer of calm. I looked through the glass door. Miles was completely innocent. Tomorrow night, the coffee shop below your office, 12 p.m. I'll be waiting. If you don't show up, I'll meet Harry first. There are things he might hear, differently from me than from you. The call ended immediately. I stood on the balcony a while longer, the phone hot, against my palm like a piece of coal. Natalie's threat wasn't blatant, but it was clear enough. She knew what I feared. I was afraid of Harry seeing Miles when I wasn't ready, afraid of him getting angry, demanding parental rights, afraid of his family looking at us with pity or suspicion. Most of all, I was afraid for Miles. A child who was used to having only a mother shouldn't suddenly be thrust between adults who had once deeply hurt each other. That night, after Miles fell asleep, I pulled out an old plastic box hidden under the bed. Inside were a few things I had intended to throw away many times, but never could. A positive pregnancy test with faded lines, old ultrasound scans, a birthday photo folded in four, a cheap bracelet Harry bought in Covent Garden when we were students, and a piece of paper with his old phone number that I used to know by heart. These things weren't worth money, but each was. Like a thorn pulling it out hurt, but leaving it in hurt too. The very first ultrasound printout lay at the bottom, its edges yellowed. The People Theat of the Shaman. Date on the slip was the day I took the overnight coach to London to find Harry, and also the day I believed I had been betrayed. I held it for a long time, wondering if I hadn't walked away that day, if I had waited for him to come back. If I had asked one more question, would Miles have had to grow up not knowing his dad? But life has no rewind button, and what-ifs only make living more exhausting. Before I could close the box, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Tom. Seeing his name, I almost hung up, but for some reason, I answered. Background was loud music, clinking glasses, laughter, and Tom's voice sounded frantic, completely different from his usual sarcastic tone. Hannah, can you come to the Oak Pub in Covent Garden? Harry is drunk. He won't go home, and he keeps demanding to see you. I rubbed my forehead, feeling as if this one day had lasted a whole month. Tom, I have a young child. I'm not a babysitter for drunks. You're his best mate, you. Take him home. If I could, I wouldn't have called you. Tom sighed, sounding genuinely helpless. He won't let anyone touch his phone, won't let the driver near him. He's just sitting there holding a carton of strawberry yazoo, asking me if he scared the kid. Look, I know I said awful things before, and you have every right to hate me, but just help me out this once. My leg is genuinely killing. Me, I can't carry him. Holding a carton of strawberry yazoo, that detail silenced me. In the bedroom, Miles turned over, hugging his teddy bear to his chest. I didn't want to go, I really didn't. But the image of Harry sitting drunk in a pub, holding a carton of kids' milk, made me feel a mix of tragicomedy and bitterness. This man could silence a boardroom, yet in front of a 4-year-old, he was so clumsy he bought milk and was terrified the kid would hate him. I texted Mrs. Higgins to pop over and check on Miles for half an hour, saying, had an emergency down the street. Mrs. Higgins, who lived alone and adored Miles, like a grandson, replied instantly, "Go on, love, I've still got your spare key." I changed my top, grabbed my purse, stood in front of the mirror for a few seconds, and told myself I was going because I was afraid a drunk would cause trouble, not because my heart softened. The pub was on a leafy street, yellow lights spilling onto the damp pavement. When I walked in, Tom was perched on the edge of looking like someone who had just survived a disaster. Harry was slumped over a table in the corner. There weren't many glasses in front of him, so he must have drunk fast or in a terrible mood to be this visibly drunk. His rolled-up shirt was wrinkled, his hair falling into his eyes, and his hand was genuinely gripping a small, slightly crushed carton of strawberry yazoo. Tom looked at me like a savior. Finally. I swear I'll never take the piss out of you again, just take him away for me. I'm not taking anyone away. I pulled up a chair opposite Harry, looking at the man sleeping on the table, unable to muster any anger. Call his driver. I did. He chased him away, said the person he needed wasn't the driver. If I wasn't so exhausted, I might have laughed. I leaned over and tapped the table. Harry, wake up. If you're drunk, go home. Stop bothering people. The man on the table stirred. He lifted his head slowly, his bloodshot eyes staring at me for a long time, as if trying to distinguish reality from illusion. Then suddenly, his usually tense face softened completely, the corners of his mouth lifting in a very faint smile. Hannah. The name was spoken in his old voice, not the formal tone he used in front of others, but the voice from years ago when he would stand outside my dorm holding Darren, a bag of chips, smiling like a kid who just did a good deed the moment he saw me. My heart skipped a beat. Alcohol can make people obnoxious, but it can also strip away the hardened shell, revealing someone who used to be so close before they became a stranger. Harry looked at me, his voice hoarse and slightly slurred. You really came? If I didn't, were you planning to sit here hugging a carton of milk until morning? I tried to sound annoyed, but Tom next to us turned his head and chuckled. I glared at him, and he instantly faked a cough. Harry looked down at the milk carton in his hand, then pushed it toward me as if offering something incredibly precious. Miles likes this kind, but today you wouldn't let me give it to him. Are you still mad? You keep popping up out of nowhere like a debt collector. I'd be mad not to. I have my guard up. I took the carton and set it aside. It was warm from being held in his hands for so long. How old are you, getting drunk and then sitting here overanalyzing buying milk for a kid? Harry went quiet for a moment, then said very softly, I was afraid he'd hate me. That sentence stopped me cold. A man who didn't even know the boy was his son was terrified that another person's child would hate him. I didn't know whether to find it funny, pathetic, or heartbreaking. Tom, sitting beside us, also went quiet, dropping his usual joking demeanor. Perhaps since running into me, Harry hadn't just thrown my life off balance, but had also thrown his own off balance in a very clumsy way. Harry propped himself up, looking at me with eyes that lacked their usual sharpness, just red and tired. Hannah, do you know how hard it was to get you into my car that night? I frowned. What night? The rainy night. He smiled a faint, foolish, sad smile. Do you know how many times I saw you? Outside your office, outside the nursery, outside the hospital. I wanted to get out and call you, but I was afraid you'd turn away. I spent a month driving around the spots you usually book Ubers, checking license plates, trying to park in the right place, but you never got in until that rainy night. I thought you'd just walk past. Who knew you'd actually open the door? My back went cold. So that meeting wasn't a complete coincidence. I've been angry that he was stalking my life, but the way he said, afraid you'd turn away made the anger catch in my throat. The old Harry would meet whoever he wanted, drag away whoever he wanted, so arrogant that if the sky fell, it had to fall his way. The man in front of me had spent a month just to park near a woman who might yell at him the second she opened the door. I suppressed the turmoil in my chest and said coldly, "You stalked me." Harry bowed his head like a schoolboy admitting a fault. Yeah, I was wrong. But I didn't know what else to do. I asked Tom. He said if I showed up looking cool, you'd waver. He's an idiot. Tom, who was drinking water, choked immediately. Oi, you can be drunk, but don't slander me. I told you not to be so dramatic. I didn't tell you to circle the hospital like a bloody night watchman. I looked at the two men, one so drunk he was grassing on his mate, the other defending himself on crutches, and suddenly found the scene hilariously inappropriate. For 5 years, whenever I thought of Harry, I remembered him as the cold, distant figure who hurt me, standing beside another woman. It turned out beneath that image, there were still moments where he was foolish, clumsy, saying and doing the wrong things, and then sitting here holding a strawberry blank bastes. Yazoo because he was afraid a child would hate him. Harry suddenly looked up, his eyes serious despite the alcohol. Hannah, I want to be Miles' dad. The whole table went silent. Tom's mouth fell open, and then very wisely he shut it. I was violently yanked back to reality. The word dad from Harry's mouth sounded far too close to the truth, so close my scalp tingled. He didn't know. He thought he was talking about being a stepdad to someone else's kid, or taking on some vague responsibility to pursue me, but that sentence still stabbed straight into the softest part of my heart. I forced a dry laugh. You think being a dad is easy? Buy a few cartons of milk, say a few sympathetic words, and you're done? It's not easy. Harry shook his head very slowly. I'll learn what he likes, what he fears when he takes his medicine, if he sleeps well or kicks off his blankets. I'll learn it all. I know I'm late, but if you just let me stand outside the door, that's enough. I'm not trying to take anyone's place. I almost asked, whose place? That place was always yours. You just didn't know. To it. But my throat tightened, and different words spilled out. Harry, you're drunk. You might not even remember this when you wake up. I'll remember. He looked at me, his eyes even redder. I remember everything. I remember you like chicken tikka masala but hate coriander. I remember your neck hurts when you sleep on couches. I remember you don't cry in front of people when you're mad, you only cry when you get home. I remember your last birthday, you looked at me like I was a stranger. My hands clenched under the table. Tom sat in silence, looking down. Perhaps he, too, remembered that birthday party. The Soho karaoke room was packed with people, flashing colored lights. Our mates were cheering. A wedding that year. Tom laughed the loudest. As for me, I looked at the cake, at the flickering candle, and said my wish was for Harry to agree to break up. That year, I thought I was the one hurting the most. Now I realize that pain doesn't just reside with the one who leaves, it also stays with the one left. Behind without understanding why. Tom exhaled, his voice much quieter than usual. Hannah, I know I said awful things. I thought you dumped Harry because you got bored, because he wasn't exciting anymore, because you embarrassed him in front of everyone and vanished. But lately I feel like it wasn't that simple. I looked at Tom. For the first time in years, his voice wasn't bitter. That should have made me feel lighter, but it only made my heart heavier. A misunderstanding created by one person is easy to hate, but when everyone contributes a bit of silence, a bit of pride, a bit of judgment, it pushes Everything so far away that no one can save it in time. Harry reached out to grab my hand but stopped halfway, as if remembering that, when I was sober, I wouldn't like it. He pulled his hand back, lowering his head, with a bitter smile. Hannah, I won't ask about his dad anymore. If you don't want to talk about it, I won't ask. But don't avoid me like I'm a plague. I can't take it. I looked at his hand resting on the table. That hand had held mine walking down winter streets, had rested on my stomach in a dream he never knew about, and had been absent during all the times I needed him most. Forgiving someone isn't as hard as admitting you still hurt because of them, because hurting means you haven't truly let go. Finally, I stood up. Tom, call a driver for him. If he refuses, tell him that when he's sober tomorrow, he needs to call and apologize for bothering me. Tonight. Harry looked up, his eyes brightening a fraction. You'll answer? I grabbed my bag, avoiding looking at him for too long. Depends on your attitude. Tom sighed in relief, digging out his phone while muttering, I've never seen a drunk bargain like you. Remember to thank me tomorrow. If I hadn't called, she would never have come. Harry ignored Tom. He just looked at me, his voice low. Hannah, I truly want to start over. I didn't answer. Stepping out of the pub, the night breeze made my head clearer. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text from Mrs. Higgins saying Miles was still sleeping soundly. I walked slowly on the pavement, my eyes stinging, but I couldn't cry. Harry was drunk. Harry was foolish. Harry wanted to be Miles's dad. All of it pushed me one step closer to the truth, but it also made the fear grow larger. That night, after thanking Mrs. Higgins and locking the door, I couldn't sleep. Miles lay on his side, his small hand tucked under his cheek. I pulled the Frumenarius plastic box out again, opened it, and looked at the yellowed ultrasound slip, then at the old birthday photo. In the photo, Harry stood behind me, hands on the back of my chair, looking at me so tenderly that if you didn't know the ending, you'd think we'd be together forever. My finger traced the face of my younger self. That girl was smiling, but just hours later, she would say the most brutal breakup line of her life. I folded the photo, placed it on the ultrasound slip, and Harry's drunken words echoed in my head. I want to be Miles's dad. Outside the window, London was deep. Into the night, traffic sounds fading. Inside the small room, the past lay open, at the foot of my bed, refusing to sleep. So the next morning, when the alarm went off, I woke up with dry eyes, feeling as if I had stayed up all night. Miles was the complete opposite. His fever was gone, and he sat happily on the bed, using his teddy bear as a patient. He tapped a plastic spoon on the bear's chest and said seriously, Patient, you must drink strawberry yazoo to get better. Watching this, I felt a mix of amusement and heartbreak. In just a few short days, Harry's strawberry yazoo had slipped into my son's playtime so naturally. I took Miles to nursery, giving the teacher extra instructions, then headed to the office as if nothing had happened. Community news to edit, interview, schedules to finalize, emails to confirm with Apex. Work always has a way of temporarily masking internal turmoil, but it couldn't mask the text from Natalie. At almost 11 a.m., 12 p.m., the coffee shop below your office. I hope you come. Alone. I read it, set the phone down, and finished typing the last sentence of my thing draft. A woman who went into the delivery room alone shouldn't tremble before a coffee date, I told myself, but my hands were cold not because I feared what Natalie might do, but because she had mentioned Miles. Adults can battle with words, glares, and old secrets, but children should never become pawns in anyone's game. At exactly 12 p.m., I went down to the cafe. It was packed with office workers on a place p.m. lunch break. The whir of espresso machines, spoons clinking against glasses, and chatter eased the tension, but Natalie's spot was easy to spot. She chose a corner booth, her back to the wall, an untouched Americano in front of her, a light blue suit, a delicate watch, hair falling softly over her. Shoulders, everything about Natalie was carefully curated to not look overdone. 5 years ago, just through a team-building photo, I felt she belonged in Harry's world more than I did. 5 years later, that feeling was still there, but it no longer made me feel inferior. It just made me tired. Natalie stood up gracefully when she saw me. Thank you for coming. I pulled up a chair and sat down, placing my phone face down on the table, having already turned on the voice recorder. I wasn't trying to play dirty. Life had simply taught me that trusting the empty words of certain people was like handing them a knife. I looked straight at her. I don't have much time. Say what you need to say. The smile on Natalie's face faded slightly. She opened her bag and slid a business card for a major PR firm in Edinburgh across the table. I know the HR director here, Hinges Dotto. They're hiring a content lead. The pay is much better than your current place, and the hours are stable for someone with a kid. If you want, I can recommend you. As for Miles's schooling, I can help get him into a good private school. I'll cover the first year's tuition. I looked at the business card without touching it. Growing up, I'd received conditional kindness many times, but kindness placed on the table before stating, the conditions still rubbed me the wrong way. I took a sip of water and asked, in exchange, I have to stay away from Harry. Natalie paused for a beat, then nodded. I'll be direct. You and Harry ended things 5 years ago. Now you have a child in your own life. He has his position. If you two get tangled up again, the person who suffers most will be the child. I let out a soft laugh. Natalie, don't use my son as a shield for your own discomfort. If you truly cared about children, you wouldn't have answered someone else's phone 5 years ago and claimed to be his girlfriend. Natalie's face changed. Even though she hid it quickly, I saw her hand gripping the coffee cup tighten. Perhaps she had prepared many lines, but didn't expect for me to cut straight to the old wound. For 5 years, I had avoided this story, avoiding it to the point I thought I lacked the energy to confront it, but sitting in front of Natalie and seeing the calm facade she built, my anger returned cold and unexpectedly sharp. Natalie lowered her eyes, her voice quieter. What happened back then wasn't Lizu. What you think. Then tell me, what did I think wrong? I placed both hands on the table, keeping my voice steady. That day, I went to his office to find him. The receptionist said you were his girlfriend and showed me a photo. I called Harry, and you answered. I asked if you were his girlfriend, and you said yes. Did I make all that up? The noise in the cafe seemed to fade away. Natalie looked at me, her lips pressed tight. A moment later, she said, at the time, I was being harassed by a stalker at work. He kept following me. I used Harry as a shield, telling some people I had a boyfriend. The rumor spread and the receptionist misunderstood. I didn't think you would show up right then. I smiled bitterly. You didn't think I'd show up, but when I called, you were very lucid when you said you were his girlfriend. Was it because I panicked? You? Natalie looked up, her eyes slightly red, though not entirely remorseful. I liked Harry. I was beside him from the early days when Apex was a mess. Working on projects with him, meeting clients with him, staying up all night fixing proposals. I knew he had a girlfriend, but you were far away. You didn't understand his world. I was there, looking at him every day. When his phone rang, and I saw your name, I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I just wanted to try it once. If you misunderstood and left, would he finally look at me? That confession wasn't loud or aggressive, but every word fell like a stone. I used to think Natalie was the victor, the one Harry chose, the one who had the right to answer his phone and stand by his side. It turned out she was just selfishly in unrequited love, using my absence to wedge herself into a gap. The tragedy was that her trying it once had robbed Miles of a father for the first 4 years of his life. I looked at her for a long time, then asked, did you tell Harry afterward? Natalie avoided my eyes. I meant to, but you broke up with him right after. He was devastated and buried himself in work. I was afraid if I told him, he'd hate me. Furthermore, he never gave me a chance. Even after you left, he never looked at me. A tiny part of me felt a twisted satisfaction, but mostly, I just felt sad. 1. Person's pain cannot compensate for the damage they caused to someone else. Natalie might be pitiful for loving someone who didn't love her back, but that didn't make her innocent. I picked up the business card on the table, glanced at it, and placed it neatly, back in front of her. I find my own jobs. I'll take care of Miles's schooling. And concerning Harry and me, you have no right to set conditions. I spoke slowly, ensuring every word was clear. 5 years ago, you used a lie to push Me out of his life. 5 years later, you want to use money and connections to push me and my son away again. Do you think I'm still that girl standing outside? His office crying. Clutching a pregnancy ultrasound? Natalie's face went white. You were pregnant? I froze. The words had left my mouth and I couldn't pull them back. For 5 years, I had hidden this like a burn scar under clothing. Yet in my anger, I had exposed it in front of the one person who shouldn't know. Natalie looked at me, her expression shifting from shock to a rapid calculating gleam. I instantly regretted it. Just then, there was the sound of a chair scraping behind me. I turned my head, and my heart seemed to stop. Harry stood less than 3 steps away. Beside him was Tom, leaning on one crutch, his face so tense it was devoid of its usual mocking grin. I didn't know when they arrived or how much they heard, but looking at Harry's eyes, I knew he had heard the most important part. He looked at me, then at Natalie, his voice so low it barely sounded like him. You were pregnant back then? Natalie jumped up first, panicking Harry. Harry didn't look at her. Tom, standing behind, looked like he wanted to say something but stopped. I sat completely still, my hands clenched under the table, until it hurt. The moment I feared most had finally arrived, not in a private room, not after I had prepared a speech, but in the middle of a crowded cafe, in front of the woman who made me leave, and the man who had no idea he was a father. Harry stepped forward, his eyes locked on me. Hannah, you broke up with me 5 years ago because you thought I cheated on you, right? My throat closed up. There was no short answer for those 5 years. I could say, yes, but the word yes was too light. I could say, because of Natalie, because of the call, because of the photo, because of my pride, because of my fear of being abandoned, because the baby in my belly multiplied every pain by a 100. But surrounded by curious glances from other tables, I only had the strength to stay silent. My silence was the answer. Harry closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the depths were bloodshot. He turned to Natalie, his voice so cold I saw her physically tremble. You answered my phone that year. Natalie opened her mouth, but no sound came out immediately. She was usually so good at maintaining a dignified facade, yet right now that shell cracked, revealing belated terror. I didn't mean for things to end up like this. I just lied and said I was your girlfriend. So she had to carry a child alone and vanish from my life. Harry cut her off. So that for 5 years I had no idea why the woman I loved most looked at me like a traitor. The phrase carry a child alone made my heart pound. Harry said it very softly, but even he paused after saying it. It was as if, at that exact second, he finally pieced all the fragments together. I was pregnant when we broke up. 5 years later, I have a 4-year-old. Miles has no father. Miles looks like him. Miles calls his father the man who made his mummy cry. He snapped his head toward me, his face previously cold with anger toward Natalie, suddenly etched with a bewildered, devastating agony. Miles. I shot up immediately, the chair screeching backward. Several people in the cafe turned to look. I grabbed my bag, trying to stop myself from shaking too. Visibly, I have to get back to the office. Harry reached out, but this time he didn't touch me. Maybe he was afraid I'd flinch or afraid that with one touch, all the truths would shatter. His voice was hoarse, the boy. Please don't ask here, I cut him off, my eyes stinging but no tears falling. Please. That word please stopped Harry in his tracks. Through all our recent meetings, I had been sarcastic, evasive, angry, and cold, but I had never lowered my voice. Like that. Perhaps he understood I was using my last ounce of strength to keep from falling apart in public. He slowly lowered his hand, nodding very slightly. Natalie stood next to him, her face as white as paper. I didn't look at her anymore. If I looked longer, I was afraid I'd say things I couldn't take back. My 5 years. Miles is 4 years without a father. The nights holding a prost, feverish child. The times he asked where his dad was, none of it could be traded. For an I didn't mean to. People who don't mean to can still force someone else's life down a very long, very cold road. I walked out of the cafe. The midday sun hit the pavement, glaring so brightly, my vision blurred. I heard Harry call my name once from behind, but I didn't turn back. My phone buzzed constantly in my pocket. Maybe it was Liam, maybe Harry, maybe Dan. I didn't answer. I just walked straight into the lift, went up to the office, locked myself in the women's toilets, turned the tap on full, blast, and leaned heavily against the sink. The mirror reflected a woman with a deathly pale face and red eyes, yet not a single tear fell. I thought I would cry when the truth of the past was finally Lowe's last, overturned. It turned out I didn't. Perhaps I had used up all my tears during the months of pregnancy, in the delivery room, during Miles's first high fever, and during the times I sat on the balcony watching other houses lit up with complete families. When I needed to cry the most, my body was just empty. A long while later, a text from Tom popped up. "Hannah, I'm sorry. I just told Harry the part of the story I knew about Natalie. He is doing terribly, but I think you're doing worse. If you need me to testify about what Natalie said, today I will." I read the message, sitting slumped on the cold tiled floor. Suddenly, the wall I had built over 5 years cracked a little more. Tom, the person who had judged me the most harshly, was the first to say that perhaps I had it worse than Harry. That sentence didn't erase what he had said in the past, but it made me feel like I was no longer completely alone in this story. That afternoon, I left work early to pick up Miles before the nursery closed. The boy ran out and hugged my legs, showing off that his teacher had praised his Pruda drawing of a house with 3 people. I looked at the paper he held up. It featured a mother with long hair, a child holding a milk carton, and a very tall man standing next to a black car. Miles explained innocently, "I drew Mr. Harry, Mummy. He's so tall I drew him," almost touching the clouds. The thin piece of paper in my hand suddenly felt as heavy as stone. I bent down and hugged him, burying my face in his sun-smelling hair for a long time. Miles thought I was tired, so he patted my back with his tiny hand, mimicking how I usually comforted him. "It's okay, Mummy. Miles is here." That evening, after Miles was asleep, the doorbell rang. I stood behind the door, looking through the peephole. Harry was standing in the corridor. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair slightly messy. He didn't have flowers or gifts. He was only holding a thin stack of papers, which I instantly recognized as the photocopies of my old ultrasound scans that I had kept in the box. I must have dropped a sheet when I grabbed my bag at the cafe, or Tom had picked it up and given it to him. Either way, the secret was no longer sitting quietly under my woad. "Bill." I opened the door. Before I could say anything, Harry looked at me with bloodshot eyes, his voice so hoarse it was almost breaking. "Hannah, if you were pregnant back then, why didn't you tell me?" He asked that question with a voice so fractured I could hear the shattering inside him. The flat door remained half open, letting the dim yellow corridor light cast a glow on the papers in his hand. A draft blew through the stairwell window, carrying the familiar damp old smell of the Millwall estate, a smell my son and I had known for years, but in that moment, it made me feel exposed to my very core. On one side was the man who had belonged to my youth, on the other was the small flat where Miles was sleeping, and in the middle was an old, thin ultrasound. Slip, so fragile it seemed it would crumble if gripped too tightly. Yet it was strong enough to shatter 5 years of silence. I didn't invite Harry in right away. My hand rested on the cold door handle. Inside the room, Miles, stirring in his sleep, snapped me back. The boy was a Thames and light sleeper. Loud voices would wake him. I didn't want him opening his eyes in the middle of the night to see his mother standing at the door with a red-eyed man holding medical papers, asking questions that even adults didn't know how to answer without causing pain. I stepped out into the corridor and closed the door softly behind me. "Keep your voice down. Miles is sleeping." Harry looked at the closed door, his gaze seemingly pulled inside it. For the first time since we reunited, the suspicion in his mind was no longer a vague shadow. It had taken form, it had a name, an age, a 4-year-old face that loved strawberry yazoo and politely greeted Mr. Harry. He looked down at the paper, his thumb rubbing over the blurred date, then looked back at me. "I found this under the table at the cafe. Tom gave it to me. The date. Hannah, the date is the day before you broke up with me." I leaned my back against the corridor wall. The cold, slightly rough texture supported me while my legs felt completely devoid of strength. Yes. Just one word. Yet Harry looked as if he had been struck. He took a half step back, his lips pressed tight, his throat moving several times before he could force the words out. "Then, why? Why?" Why? Why? 5 years ago, I asked myself that same question a million times. Why? Didn't he answer his phone? Why was another woman holding his phone? Why, when I went looking for him with an ultrasound in my pocket, did people tell me he had a girlfriend? Why did I love someone enough to have his child only to walk away with the cruelest breakup line possible? But the answer couldn't start from tonight. It had to start from much further. Back, from the days when we were young and foolishly thought love was enough. That year, I was 23, having just graduated university a few months prior, working as a freelance reporter for a local paper. My monthly wage wasn't enough to cover my rent if I didn't take on extra copywriting gigs. Harry, 2 years older, had moved to London with his mates for his first project with Apex. When we were dating, he was arrogant and bold. He would stand in the rain waiting for my shift to end. He would drive across the city just because I said I craved a late-night kebab. And he would argue with me just because I forgot to text him that I was home. We loved loudly, like two kids who thought love was the whole world. But when the real world started demanding bills, distance, and maturity, we both floundered. The first month of long distance was still sweet. Every day, Harry would video call, telling me about difficult clients, how Tom messed up a presentation or where the new office roof leaked. I told him about the editor, demanding rushed articles, the landlord raising the rent, and the local chippy, serving smaller portions but charging more. We laughed, missed each other, and promised to meet at the weekend. But by the second month, the calls became sparse. Harry got busier, and I got more exhausted. Sometimes he texted in the middle of the night when I was already asleep. I'd call back in the morning and he'd be in a meeting. The I misuse were pushed beneath. I'm a bit busy, I'm exhausted. Let's talk. Tonight. And then tonight became tomorrow. Right at that time, I found out I was pregnant. I still remember the smell of antiseptic from that first clinic visit. The female GP adjusted her glasses and asked if I was with anyone. I shook my head. Hearing the words "you're pregnant," all the sounds around me seemed to have the volume turned down. I was scared, but not just scared. Amidst the fear was a place in down a tiny spark of joy, like a match shielded in the palm of a hand. I thought of Harry, thought of how he would scold me for going to the doctor alone, and then definitely hug me tight. I thought that even though we had nothing, as long as he was there, I wouldn't be afraid anymore. That night, I called him countless times. The calls wouldn't connect. The texts only showed one tick. I knew he was on a business trip, but I didn't know where, didn't know when he'd be back, didn't know why, exactly when I needed him most. His entire world had locked its doors to me. The next morning, I called in sick, stuffed a few clothes and the ultrasound paper into a backpack, and bought a coach ticket to London. 12 hours on a pauper scene in Ontech. Bus left my back aching and my lower stomach throbbing, but I clutched my backpack tightly, as if simply holding onto that piece of paper would secure our future. I arrived in London to bitter cold. I got off at Victoria Coach Station with greasy hair, dry lips, and exhausted legs. I didn't have much money, so I took the tube and then walked a long way to the building where Harry worked. The lobby was gleaming, the receptionists in immaculate uniforms speaking softly. A girl from the provinces like me standing there, in an old coat and dusty boots, hugging a backpack, suddenly felt minuscule in his world. I asked if Harry was in. The receptionist looked me up and down, polite but distant. Are you looking for Mr. Davenport? He's away on a business trip. Who did he go with? The question slipped out purely out of instinct. I just wanted to find a way to contact him. She smiled, likely with no malicious intent, just a bit of careless office gossip. Probably with Natalie from PR. Natalie is his girlfriend. They're always together. Girlfriend? The word hit my ears so hard I thought I misheard. I said I was a friend of Harry's and asked if I could see a picture of Natalie. The receptionist pointed to a team-building photo on the internal network. In it, Harry sat in the middle of a group, and Natalie sat next to him, holding a glass, leaning very close to him. One photo couldn't tell the whole truth, but in that moment, combined with his unreachable phone, the exhaustion of the overnight coach, and the new pregnancy, it formed a sentence that I wasn't clear-headed enough to appeal. I left the building, standing on the pavement, and called Harry again. It rang. For a very long time, so long that my hope sparked back to life when someone finally answered. But the voice wasn't his. "Hello, this is Natalie. Harry is busy." I remember standing frozen on the street. Cars sped by, horns blaring. Someone bumped my shoulder, but I didn't feel it. I asked if she was his girlfriend. The voice on the other end answered lightly, almost without hesitation. "Yes. If you need something, you can just tell me." There was no screaming fit of jealousy, no scene where I shouted, cursed, or demanded to see Harry. I simply hung up. The hand holding the phone trembled so violently I almost dropped it, while the ultrasound paper in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. That night, I sat at the coach station, crying so hard the person selling tea nearby asked if I'd been pickpocketed. I didn't answer. If you get pickpocketed, you can call the police. If you get betrayed by the person you love, who do you report it to? Harry returned the following afternoon. He called me, his voice a mix of joy and annoyance because I had come without warning. He rushed to meet me at a cafe, near his office. Seeing my cold hands, he instantly grabbed them and shoved them into his coat pockets, just like always. That familiar gesture only made it hurt more. How could someone who could be so gentle to me also let another woman answer his phone and claim to be his girlfriend? He said his phone died on the flight, asked if I had eaten, and offered to take me to a full English breakfast without the baked beans, just how I liked it. I looked at him, wanting to ask right then, wanting to throw the photo, the phone, call the name Natalie in his face. But exactly at that moment, his phone rang. Harry looked at the screen and frowned slightly, but still answered. I stood close enough to hear a faint female voice. I couldn't hear what she said, only heard him reply, "I'm busy, we'll talk tomorrow." But a moment later, his expression shifted slightly, and he added, "Fine, I'll drop by the office soon." When he hung up, I asked who called. Harry answered very naturally, "Natalie, from PR, urgent issue." A perfectly normal sentence if not for the call the night before, the receptionist's words, or the photo. But with all of those, that normalcy became a knife slash. I pulled my hands out of his pockets. Harry froze while I stepped back, looking at the man I loved with a feeling that was both familiar and utterly alien. "Your hands are cold," he said, stepping forward. "Don't touch me," I said. Harry stopped. He thought I was still mad about an argument from the week before, so he sighed, sounding somewhat helpless. "Hannah, stop being childish. Please? I'm genuinely busy." The word childish brought everything crashing down. I was carrying his child. I took a 1-2 hour coach to find him. I had just heard another woman claim to be a girlfriend. Yet in his eyes, I was just being childish. Perhaps he didn't mean it, but sometimes a careless remark is enough to push someone off a cliff. I said I wanted to break up. For the first time, Harry didn't agree. He dragged me back to his flat, cooked noodles, put painkillers in front of me, coaxed me, got angry, and then coaxed me again. I stayed silent for nearly a week. He called, I didn't answer. He texted, I ignored it. I wanted him to confess it. Himself. Wanted him to choose me before I had to open my mouth to beg. But Harry didn't know what he had to confess. He only thought I was mad about the closes. Distance, about him being busy and thoughtless. My birthday arrived in a cramped Soho karaoke room filled with his friends and mine. Harry had brought Tom and some others, bought a cake, prepared a gift, and tried to make me happy. Everyone joked that we should get married, telling me to wish to be a bride that year. Tom laughed the loudest. As for me, I stood in front of the cake, looking at the flickering candle in the air conditioning. Draft, the folded ultrasound paper still in my pocket. I could have told the truth. I could have dragged Harry outside, asked him about Natalie, told him I was pregnant, and given him a chance to explain. But my youth back then was filled with both agony and a foolish, towering pride. I didn't want to be the betrayed girl clutching her stomach and begging. I didn't want my child to become the reason to keep a man who had changed his mind. So I looked at Harry, at all the friends waiting for the joke to continue, and said my birthday wish was for him to agree to break up. The karaoke room went dead silent. Harry looked at me for a very long time, his face chalk white. He asked if I still loved him. I smiled, using my calmest voice to deliver the most devastating sentence of my life. Loving you was nothing special. I had my fun, and now I'm done. I knew that sentence stabbed him deeply, but at the time, I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to feel a fraction of what I was bearing. I wanted him to remember that he wasn't the only one with the power to abandon someone. After that night, I left London, changed my number, and moved. The baby grew in, my belly alongside my stubbornness and my fear. The months of pregnancy were not rosy. My morning sickness was so bad the smell of rice made me vomit, yet I still had to write articles, do interviews, and squeeze onto buses. Once, while reporting on localized flooding, I felt so dizzy I almost collapsed. A street vendor helped me under an awning and scolded me, running around in the street. "Pregnant like this? Where's your husband?" I smiled and said, "He's working away." That lie eventually became a habit. "He's working away. His dad is busy. He hasn't come home yet." Every time I said it, my heart grew a little more calloused. Miles was born on an afternoon with light rain. The delivery room was cold, the lights bright white. The nurse asked where my family was. I said they were filling out paperwork, but the truth was, out in the corridor, there was only Mrs. Higgins, a recently acquainted neighbor who took pity and brought me in. When Miles cried for the first time, I didn't cry right away. I just looked at that red, wrinkled face, suddenly thinking how clever the baby was coming into. The world without anyone to welcome him, just his mother. It wasn't until the, quote, nurse placed him beside me, and I saw his half-open eyes looking bizarrely like Harry's that my tears finally fell. Not out of resentment, and not quite out of longing. It was just that I knew from that second on my life had no way back. When I finished the story, the corridor was so quiet that even the sound of the from Oxend lift descending could be heard perfectly. Harry stood before me, both eyes red, the ultrasound paper crumpled in his fist. He hadn't interrupted the entire time. The man who couldn't bear 3 minutes of my silence in the past had stood still, listening to me recount 5 years in a monotone voice, receiving every stab wound he never knew he'd inflicted. A long time later, he finally spoke. "I didn't love Natalie. Never." I looked at him, my throat bitter. I know that now. That day, when she answered my phone, I had no idea. She used my name as a shield. I heard about it later, but I thought it was sordid. "I didn't tell you, because I was afraid you'd overthink it. I was an idiot, Hannah. I thought not. Speaking would prevent a misunderstanding. It turns out that silence killed everything." The apology hadn't spilled out yet, but his eyes were brimming with it. I suddenly felt so exhausted that I had no energy left to keep blaming him. Some truths arrive so late they don't bring immediate relief. They just make you realize you've been carrying a pointless boulder for far too long. Behind the door, Miles called out in his sleep, a very small sound. Both Harry and I turned our heads. Just a child's murmur, but it pulled us out of the past and slammed us straight into the present. Harry looked at the door, then at me, his voice trembling. Is Miles my son?" I closed my eyes. The question had finally arrived, and this time I couldn't lie anymore. "I don't know if you have the right to ask that." I opened my eyes and looked at him, my voice very soft. "But Miles has the right to know the truth. If you want to know, we do it the right way. No guesswork, no tug of war in front of him. A DNA test, clear paperwork, and until we have the results, you are not allowed to claim anything to Miles." Harry nodded immediately, so fast it was as if he feared I'd change my mind. "Whatever you say, I'll do. I won't fight for him, won't pressure him, won't take him anywhere without asking. Hannah, I just beg you. Please don't disappear again." I didn't answer. There was still too much chaos inside me, anger, affection, fear, exhaustion, and a sliver of relief I didn't dare accept. But as I opened the door to go inside, before I closed it, I heard Harry standing in the corridor say very softly, "Those 5 years, you worked so hard." A sentence arriving 5 years late. But finally, someone had said it. Yet the next morning when I woke up, my heart didn't feel as entirely unburdened as I had imagined. An apology is like a painkiller. It might soothe you for a while, but the internal wound still needs time to heal. Miles sat on his little chair eating eggs on toast, swinging his legs, ketchup smeared on his mouth, completely unaware that his mother had opened a massive door last night, and that the man named Harry standing in the corridor had nearly collapsed over an old piece of paper. I looked at my son, my heart sinking again. Adults often say the truth is the right thing to do, but very few mention how terrifyingly confusing the truth can be for a child if adults handle it calmly. Miles was used to a home with only his mother, used to Uncle Dan being the kind doctor, used to Mrs. Higgins coming over, used to vague answers about his father. Now, if I told him one day that the Mr. Harry who bought him Strawberry Yazoo might be his dad, would his little world be happy or scared? Would he believe it immediately, or ask why his dad hadn't come sooner? Harry didn't press me, which surprised me. All morning, he only sent one very short message. I've contacted a licensed DNA testing center. Whenever you are ready, I'll go with you. Before that, I want to send you an agreement drafted by my lawyer. Read it, then decide. No long-winded pleading, no pressure, no I'm his father, so I have rights. Attitude that I feared most. Perhaps after last night, Harry understood that if he stepped 1 inch out of line, I would grab Miles and run for real. The agreement arrived in my email near midday. I read it over and over, so slowly my eyes hurt. It clearly stated that Harry would not unilaterally contact, pick up, announce his paternity, or interfere with Miles's residence, schooling, or my custody rights without my consent. All steps to confirm. Paternity must be based on the child's emotional well-being and executed legally. Regardless of the outcome, he would not use his financial status to exert pressure. The document was dry and legal, but reading the final paragraph, my throat tightened. The man who used to do whatever he pleased was now learning to stand strictly outside the boundaries I had drawn. I took the printout to the hospital to see Dan, not because I wanted him to decide for me, but because over my years as a mother, Dan was one of the very few people who knew how terrified and hard I had fought. He read it carefully, frowning at times, nodding at others. The doctor's break room was quiet at lunch. The squeak of a medicine trolley could be heard outside. I sat opposite him, my hands resting on my bag, feeling as if I was putting my child's entire life on the table, asking someone else to check if there were any fragile parts. Dan put the agreement down, his voice calm. In terms of attitude, he's doing the right thing. At least right now, he has no intention of fighting you or forcing you. I looked at the text on the paper and muttered, I'm still scared. I know. Dan poured me a glass of water. But Hannah, being scared is your issue, while the right to know his father belongs to Miles. Those two things are connected, but they aren't the same. You can take it slow. You can set conditions. You can protect your son through every legal means. But if Harry really is Miles's dad, the boy will eventually need a kinder answer than Daddy went far away. I held the glass, the warmth transferring to my hands. Dan didn't speak much, but every sentence hit exactly where I was trying to avoid. I had used my pain to shield myself, telling myself I was protecting my son. But perhaps I had also forced my son to live in the void created by adults. A child shouldn't have to grow up on lies, even if those lies are wrapped in a mother's love. Dan looked at me a moment longer, then gave a very gentle smile. And don't feel guilty towards me. I froze. I'm not stupid enough not to see where this is going, Dan cut me off though. His tone held no blame. I care about you too. I used to think that if there was a chance, it would be nice. But caring about someone doesn't mean standing in front of their life forever as a roadblock. Miles has a dad, and if that dad is decent enough to learn from scratch, I'm happy for the boy. Dan's kindness made my eyes sting. Some people appear in your life not to be the main character, but without them, you would have collapsed at certain bends in the road. I thanked him, my voice tiny. Dan just laughed and said the next time Miles goes to the dentist, I shouldn't scare him about monsters drilling into his teeth, because the boy had repeated it to the entire IV room, making several other toddlers cry in fear. That afternoon, I texted Harry, tomorrow we go for the test. But in front of Miles, you are just Mr. Harry, nothing more. He replied almost instantly. I remember. The testing center was in a pristine medical building in central London. Reception staff were incredibly professional. I brought Miles along under the guise of an extra health check advised by the doctor. The boy was unsuspicious, and even happy that Mr. Harry was there too. Harry wore a simple shirt, bringing no driver or assistant. He just stood in the waiting area, holding a small robot toy still in its box. Catching my eye, he hurriedly explained, "I haven't given it to him, I just brought it. If you say, no, I'll put it away." Miles had already spotted the robot, his eyes lighting up like bulbs. I sighed, knowing that if I said no, I'd look like the villain in my son's eyes. "You can give it to him, but you can't buy him too much. Children don't need to be compensated with toys." Harry nodded so seriously that the receptionist looked at him, slightly amused. Miles accepted the robot, politely said thank you, and sat on a chair trying to build it, completely oblivious to the adult's tension. When they called his name, I signed the consent forms. They took a cheek swab. From Miles first. The boy found it ticklish and giggled. When it was Harry's turn, he sat in the chair opposite his son, his gaze falling over the small face, like a starving man staring at a meal he didn't dare touch. Walking out of the testing room, Miles tugged at Harry's sleeve, showing off the testing room. Robot he had transformed incorrectly. Harry crouched down, listening patiently. As my son explained, even though he had clearly stuck the legs where the head should be, I stood a few steps away, watching the scene, a dull ache in my chest. If that phone call hadn't happened 5 years ago, would Harry have held Miles from the day he was born? Would he have fumbled changing nappies? Listened to the fetal heartbeat with me, panicked like the sky was falling when the baby peed on his shirt? Those unlived memories suddenly flashed so clearly I had to turn my face away. The results were promised in 2 days. Those 2 days were much longer than I anticipated. Harry didn't bombard me with questions. He only texted at the right times. "Has Miles taken his medicine? Was he good at nursery today? Do you need me to give you a lift to pick him up?" I replied briefly, but I was no longer completely silent. Tom texted to apologize to me again. He even mentioned that Harry was reading so many parenting books lately that he accidentally sent a link titled "What to Do" when a 4-year-old throws a tantrum into a corporate work group. I was stressed, but I couldn't help bursting into laughter. Some men learn to be fathers through instinct, some through books. Harry was probably learning through sheer guilt. The day we got the results, it was raining lightly again. Harry and I sat in the consultation room. Between us was a white envelope. The staff explained the process, confirmed the details, and placed the result on the table. The technical jargon went in one ear and out the other, until I saw the line, regarding the probability of paternity, 99.999%. It wasn't a surprise, yet it felt as if someone had placed the entire sky into my lap. Harry stared at the paper for a very long time. I thought he would cry, or laugh, or hug me, or do something impulsive like he used to. But he just sat, completely still, hands clasped together, his head bowed very low, his shoulders shaking slightly. The man who used to stand in front of a whole board of partners without changing his expression was now sitting before a test result, so silent I could hear the rain tapping on the window pane. A long moment later, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I have a 4-year-old son." I didn't answer. The words on the page blurred. I had waited too long for someone else to acknowledge Miles's existence with full responsibility. Yet when it was finally spoken, my heart just felt squeezed tight. Miles was no longer my secret alone. It was terrifying, but also a relief. From now on, when he asked where his dad was, I wouldn't have to invent another distant journey. Harry looked up at me. His eyes were red, but his voice was clear. "Hannah, I'm sorry. Not just for Natalie, for the phone call, or because I was too stupid to explain. I'm sorry for all the nights you went to appointments alone, gave birth alone, signed the birth certificate alone, listened to him cry with a fever alone, and answered the question, 'Where is Daddy?' alone. I wasn't there when I was supposed to be there the most. This apology isn't enough, but I have to say, my tears fell unexpectedly, no sobbing, no wailing, just single drops sliding down my cheeks. I hadn't cried in front of Natalie. I hadn't cried in the office. Toilets? I hadn't cried when recounting the day Miles was born. But at the very second, someone finally called all those hardships by their true names, my body. Felt allowed to be tired. Harry handed me a tissue but didn't touch me. "I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately. I'm not asking you to take me back just because of our child. I'm only asking to learn how to be Miles's dad from the smallest things." And if one day you feel there is still something I can do for you, not with money, not with power, but with basic decency, then, please, let me stand a little closer. I took the tissue, wiped my tears, my voice still choked. Harry, I don't want. Miles pulled back and forth. I don't want him seeing adults close one day, angry, the next, and vanishing the day after. If you step into his life, you stay out of responsibility. You don't get to be a dad on a whim and quit when you're tired. I swear, Harry said immediately, then stopped, as if afraid an oath sounded hollow. No, I won't just say it, just watch what I do. That evening, I didn't tell Miles right away. I needed time. Harry did too. But when I got home, the boy was sitting at his little table drawing. Seeing me, he held up his new picture. It was still 3 people, but this time the tall man was colored in a blue shirt, identical to the one Harry wore at the testing. Center, Miles asked very softly, as if afraid I'd be sad. Mummy, does Mr. Harry like me? I sat down next to him, pulling him into my lap. Outside the window, the rain fell as thin as a curtain. I kissed his hair, speaking slowly so every word wouldn't scare him. Yes, Mr. Harry likes you very much. And Mummy thinks, there's something Mummy needs to tell you, but I'll tell you slowly so you can understand, okay? Miles blinked. About Daddy? I choked, then nodded. The boy was quiet for a moment, then hugged my neck, whispering, if it's hard to say, Mummy, you can tell me tomorrow. I'm not in a hurry. A 4-year-old child said he wasn't in a hurry, while we adults had been rushing blindly for 5 years. I hugged my son tightly, realizing for the first time that no matter how painful the truth is, it can open a new path, as long as the adults are willing to slow down for the child's sake. I told Harry he could see Miles a few times a week, starting with very normal things, picking him up from nursery after I notified the teachers, taking him to the doctor if needed, sharing a meal, reading a bedtime story, but he had to leave before Miles went to sleep. He listened intently, recording it in his lack time, phone as if scheduling a board meeting. Seeing his serious demeanor, I felt both amused and slightly softened. The first day Harry picked Miles up from school, he wore a crisp white shirt, standing among parents in business wear and joggers, holding exactly 1 carton of strawberry yazoo because I had warned him not to overdo it. The teacher called me to confirm if Mr. Harry was allowed to pick him up, her tone curious, but polite. Standing in the lobby of my office building, I heard Miles cheering. Through the phone. Mummy, Mr. Harry really came. He's as tall as the tree. Outside! Just one child's sentence made my eyes sting. Because before today, the only people who waited at the gate were me, Mrs. Higgins, or Dan. That day, for the first time, Miles had a man waiting for him, looking pitifully clumsy. Harry was learning to be a father through small failures. He didn't know a place. 4-year-old could ask the same question 10 times. So during their first trip to get food, he seriously explained why soup is hot, why mushrooms aren't meat, and why mint is called mint, until Miles asked, Mr. Harry, are you tired yet? He also didn't know Miles hated peas, so when he was met with a look of utter disappointment for forcing him to eat them, Harry quickly apologized and picked every single pea out, while Miles sighed like an old man. You aren't as professional as Mummy. That night, he texted me, being a dad is harder than running a company. I looked at the message, and for the first time, laughed out loud. After many days, I replied, a company has employees who follow orders. Toddlers do not. Harry replied with a sheepish smiley face, then asked if Miles needed a heavy coat tomorrow because rain was forecast. These small questions gradually became part of my day. No drama, no pressure. It felt like someone patiently knocking on the door with their knuckles instead of kicking it down. Natalie came to see me once after the truth came out. She no longer wore the arrogant pride from our first coffee meeting. She just sat opposite me in a small cafe near my office, her hands resting on an untouched cup of tea. She said Harry had removed her from her position managing his inner circle PR, transferring all his accounts to someone else. She also proactively resigned after the handover, not because Harry forced her to, but because she had no face left to stay. I didn't know if I wanted her to look more pathetic or not. Perhaps a very ugly part of me once wanted Natalie to hurt as much as I had. But looking at the woman in front of me, I didn't feel triumphant. For 5 years, I had lived 2 long with the wound she helped create to waste my life harboring hatred. Hating, someone takes energy, and I wanted to save that energy to raise Miles, write my articles, and sleep well at night. Natalie spoke very softly. I'm sorry. I know this is late and insufficient. That year I was jealous of you, jealous enough to think I had the right to interfere. I thought if you just left, Harry would look at me. But he didn't, and I had to live knowing I ruined someone else's life. I looked at her, feeling calmer than I expected. You didn't ruin my whole life. I'm still alive. Miles is growing up, and I refuse to let my life be defined by your mistake. But I can't forgive you right away, maybe I never will. I just never want to see you again in any matter involving my son. Natalie nodded, her eyes red, but she didn't cry. Before leaving, she said she was moving away from London for a while, finding a place without Harry to learn how to live a more decent life. I didn't wish her happiness, nor did I curse her. I just watched her silhouette fade beyond the glass and felt an old chapter. In my heart, close not with a bang as I had imagined, but as light as an exhale. After a long journey, Tom also came to apologize. He chose the day Harry took Miles to the park. His limp was less pronounced, but his mouth was still slightly unfiltered. The moment he saw me, Tom scratched his head and unleashed a monologue, admitting he was an idiot for listening to one side and judging me, and for sending those nasty texts after finding out I had a kid. I stood by the refreshment stand, listening to him talk until he ran out of breath. Finally, Tom concluded with something very genuine. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened. I just want to say, if Harry ever does anything stupid again, just call me and I'll help you shout at him. I have 20 years of experience shouting at him. I burst out laughing. That laugh made Tom sigh in relief, like someone whose sentence had been reduced. Some apologies can't erase old scars, but at least they return a bit of justice to the misunderstood. Tom went from being the bitter loudmouth who defended his mate to the guy who occasionally took Miles to play football with Harry, getting exhausted playing goalie for my son. Life is funny. The person who told me to stay away from Harry was eventually the one sending me videos of Harry sitting exhausted on the grass, getting hit in the grass net, shinned by Miles's football, yet still clapping and praising him. Dan stepped back in the gentlest way possible. One afternoon, I took Miles in for a checkup. Dan finished examining him, prescribed some vitamins, and ruffled Miles's hair as always. Miles bragged that Mr. Harry had learned how to pick the peas out of his food. Dan smiled kindly, saying Mr. Harry was learning fast. When Miles ran out to get a sticker from the nurse, Dan looked at me, his eyes clear and calm. You look less tired, he said. I didn't know what to say besides thank you. Dan shook his head. The nice guy isn't always the one who gets chosen. But if my kindness helped you through a rough patch, then that's enough. I listened, my eyes stinging. There are people you don't love the way they might hope, but you spend your whole life feeling grateful they appeared exactly when you thought you had no one. Before leaving, Dan gave Miles a superhero sticker, reminded him to brush his teeth, and whispered to me, Hannah, peace doesn't always mean being alone. If someone can help you maintain your peace, trying to trust them a little bit more isn't a bad thing. I took that sentence home and thought about it for a long time. Harry didn't propose right away. Perhaps if he were his 5-year-old self, he would have bought a ring, booked an extravagant restaurant, done everything on a restaurant, grand scale, and forced me to be moved. But the Harry of today just showed up, consistently. He learned to mix formula at the right temperature, remembered Miles needed warm water with his cough syrup, and knew to always pack a spare set of clothes because the boy loved splashing in puddles. He also learned to sit on a cheap plastic chair in my kitchen, clumsily peeling potatoes, listening to me vent about the newsroom without immediately offering a financial solution. One day I complained about my editor pushing a deadline, and he just asked, Do you want me to listen to you swear at the world, or do you want me to help think of a solution? That question made me pause, then laugh. It turned out, a mature man isn't someone who solves everything for you, but someone who knows that before solving anything, you just need to be heard. Miles called Harry Dad on a completely normal evening, with no background music, no prepared tears. It was a cold evening. Harry had come over for dinner. Miles was carrying a bowl of soup to the table, spilled it, and braced himself to be scolded. His face dropped. Harry grabbed a cloth and wiped it up before I could yell, simply telling him to hold bowls with 2 hands next time. Miles looked at him, perhaps realizing he was off the hook, quickly hugged his neck, and blurted out, "Daddy cleans better than me." The kitchen fell silent for a few seconds. I was standing by the rice cooker, holding a spoon. Harry was bent over the table, still holding the wet cloth. He didn't dare move, terrified that if he shifted even slightly, the word he just heard would vanish. Miles didn't understand why the 2 adults froze, looking up to ask, "Can I call you that?" Mummy said to wait, "But I think Mr. Harry is like a daddy now." I looked at Harry. His eyes went red instantly, but he looked at me first, asking for permission with his eyes before answering his son. For the first time, I didn't look away. I gave a very slight nod. Harry pulled Miles into his arms, his movements as careful as holding a gift. That arrived 5 years late. His voice shook, but he tried to make it sound cheerful so he wouldn't scare the boy. "Yes, you can call me that whenever you want, but Daddy is still learning. If there's something I'm not good at yet, Miles has to teach me, okay?" Miles patted his shoulder, acting like a grown-up. "Okay, but Daddy has to learn fast. Mummy is very good. Daddy has to catch up." I turned away, pretending to scoop rice, but tears fell onto the back of my hand. Happiness sometimes doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a spilled bowl of soup, a dishcloth, and the word daddy slipping out during a dinner so ordinary that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it entirely. 3 months later, I agreed to let Harry take Miles and me to Cornwall for a few days, treating it as a make-up holiday for the days spent between hospitals, newsrooms, DNA clinics, and tears. I still hadn't agreed to marry him, and Harry didn't push. He just said we had the rest of our lives. He was 5 years late, so he could wait as long as it took, as long as Miles and I didn't disappear from his life again. If said in a romance novel, it might sound cheesy, but hearing Harry say it while folding Miles's laundry, accidentally mistaking a boy's jumper for a face towel, I found it more comical than touching. The holiday turned the 2 adults into walking zombies. At the beach, Miles screamed and ran. Back at the hotel, he jumped on the bed. On the train, he asked the conductor why clouds didn't fall down. Getting off the train, he demanded ice cream. Harry used to confidently manage a corporation of hundreds, but ended up being spun around by a 4-year-old so much that every night he collapsed on the sofa, staring at the ceiling as if he'd just signed away his soul. I teased him. Someone said they'd learn everything to be Miles's dad. Changing your mind now? Harry pulled a pillow over his face, his voice exhausted but still joking. Is there a 7-day return policy? Miles, building a robot on the rug, immediately spun around. You can't return. Me? I don't have a box anymore. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my water. Harry laughed too, then opened his arms, calling his son over. Miles launched into his chest like a cannonball, landing on his stomach and making Harry groan in faux pain. The scene was noisy and messy, nothing like the perfect family photos online, but it was so real it made my heart melt completely. I used to think a happy ending meant every loss. I had to be perfectly compensated. Now I understood. Some things can't be compensated for. You can only keep living together, allowing new, ordinary days to slowly cover the old spots. When we returned to London, Tom picked us up at the station. As soon as he saw the 3 of us looking completely drained, he burst out laughing. You look like you just got back from an expedition in the jungle. Thought this was a romantic getaway, didn't realize a toddler sucked the life out of you. Harry put down the suitcases, looking at Tom with an incredibly gentle gaze, so gentle I knew for a fact he was about to enact revenge. Tom, there's a project surveying roofing materials in the Scottish Highlands. I think you're perfect for it. Tom instantly took a step back, hugging his crutch like an amulet. Mate, we've known each other for years. You can't exile me just because I speak the truth. Miles didn't understand, but seeing the adults laughing, he laughed too. The boy ran around the suitcases and nearly tripped. Harry quickly caught him, and while I scolded Miles to slow down, I couldn't stop smiling. The station was packed, announcements echoing continuously. People dragging luggage back and forth, life, loud and ordinary. Amidst that ordinary life, Harry turned, picked up my bag, and took Miles's hand with his other. He didn't ask, didn't show off. He just did it as if it was exactly what he was meant to do. That evening, after putting Miles to bed, Harry stayed out on the small balcony of the council flat. The rosemary pot I thought had died after the first heavy rain had surprisingly sprouted a few new green leaves. I watered the plant while he sat on a plastic chair slightly too small for his frame, looking at the tiny kitchen and Miles's drying clothes. He spoke very softly. "These past 5 years, you turned this place into a home." I set the watering can down. If I didn't, where would my son and I go? He smiled a sad smile, but it wasn't drowning in guilt like before. "From now on, let me lend a hand, okay? Not to change everything. Just, when a light bulb breaks, I'll fix it. When Miles has a fever, I'll stay up with you. When you're tired, I'll wash the dishes. Just small things." I looked at him. The man in front of me was no longer the boy I loved with all, the pride of my youth. Nor was he just the ex who broke my heart. He was Miles's dad, someone learning to slow down, someone who knew to stand outside the door, waiting for me to open it rather than barging in. If love simply reverted to exactly how it used to be, we would probably just hurt each other again. But if it started with small things, washing dishes, monitoring fevers, doing the school run, picking peas out of food, maybe it would be more real and more enduring. I didn't say yes to marrying him, nor did I offer complete forgiveness. I just handed him the kitchen cloth, my voice calm. "Then start with the pile of dishes in the sink." Harry looked at the cloth, then at me, his eyes lighting up as if he'd just been handed a wedding ring. He stood up so fast he nearly bumped his head on the washing line, making me laugh. From the bedroom, Miles mumbled "Daddy" in his sleep. Harry stopped dead, looking inside with a gaze so soft I didn't have the heart to tease him anymore. Late that night, the sound of water running in the sink, the clinking of Harry clumsily stacking plates, the even breathing from the bedroom, and the wind rustling through the balcony all blended into a very strange melody. No high drama, no glamour, not like the explosive endings people often tell to make. Listeners burst into tears. But to me, it was perfect in its own unique way. Because in the end, happiness isn't about never having missed out. It's about when people who lost each other for long enough still have the decency to return, and the patience to learn how to love each other in ordinary days. I stood at the kitchen door watching Harry wipe the third plate, which still had soap suds on it, sighing and telling him to wash it again. He turned around, smiled slightly sheepishly, and obediently did as told. The rosemary pot on the Kemenez balcony trembled slightly in the wind, a few new green leaves shining under the placid yellow light. I suddenly thought, there are things we think are dead, but in truth, if they are put back in the right place and watered with a bit of patience, they can still live on. This time, I didn't have to bear it all alone anymore. This story makes us feel for a mother who had to hold herself together for too long, and also makes us think about the responsibilities of those who are in love. Sometimes, silence is not protection, it is the cause of losing another. In family or marriage, self-respect is necessary, but trust and honesty are equally important. Perhaps the most valuable thing isn't about who was right or wrong, but that after everything, each person was decent enough to admit their faults, patient enough to heal, and loved a child enough to slow down. If it were you, would you give the person who hurt you a chance to make amends? Please leave a comment, click like, and subscribe to the channel to hear more moving, real-life stories together. Goodbye.